Polixenes ignored him, harboring resentment toward his former friend for supporting Davos. Suddenly, thin blue smoke rose from the torch. Cries of astonishment erupted from the crowd. The smoke burst into a red-yellow flame, igniting the oil-soaked linen. "Oh, Hades!" the crowd roared, the sound shaking the very hill as they witnessed the miracle. Guests watched in disbelief, wondering if I truly held Hades' favor. Senators gazed at me with awe, while Polixenes trembled, imagining Hades' cold, majestic eyes watching him from my torch. I exhaled in relief. Despite my rehearsals and careful timing, the pressure of performing before tens of thousands was immense. Had I failed, my reputation as the god-favored would have vanished. Thankfully, Hades blessed my success. I rose, holding the torch high as the crowd's cheers washed over me. Accompanied by priests, I entered the temple of Hades to ignite the bronze brazier, establishing a sacred fire to burn eternally for Dionia's prosperity. As I exited, bugles and drums signaled the arrival of legates Capys, Drax, and Hieronymus, followed by 8 captains and 40 squad leaders, all in full armor, carrying 3 stone steels. As the crowd puzzled over the steels, the high priest announced, "Dionia's growth relies on Hades and the sacrifices of our citizens. Never forget the warriors who died for us. Their names are carved here. Hades grants them entry into this temple as heroic spirits, to be honored by all future generations." I knelt solemnly before the stones. The officers and all present soldiers knelt in unison, their expressions grave and respectful. To the citizens, the steels were no longer cold stone, but living memories. The families of the fallen wept openly, their grief echoing through the solemn, kneeling crowd. Warriors never die, their spirits live forever. I led the citizens in bowing to the steels. A sudden wind whipped up and clouds obscured the sun, leading the people to believe their prayers had been heard by the heavens. Amidst continuous prayers, bugles and drums played as the officers marched the steels into the temple under the gaze of thousands. Lysias was deeply moved, struck by the extraordinary level of reverence Dionia showed its fallen soldiers. Ascamas, the Crotan naval commander, lost his mocking demeanor, his face turning serious. He and Lysias exchanged glances, both fearing whether Croton could ever defeat such high-spirited Dionian soldiers in future wars. While other guests felt similarly, Canios of Elia was pleased to see Dionia's growing strength. As the music shifted to harps, Shao Helicalide and Piasix brought a stone bust before the temple. "Citizens of Dionia," I shouted, "who designed and led the construction of Thurii?" "Heraclid," the crowd replied. "And who designed this temple of Hades?" "Heraclid." The response grew stronger. "Who worked until his final breath, despite illness, for the love of this city?" I demanded. "Who was he?" "Heraclid," the roar echoed through the hills. I declared that Heraclid's bust would reside in the Hall of Sages, honored by Hades. I promised that all future contributors to Dionia would receive similar recognition, their souls forever linked to the Alliance. Note: the use of concave mirrors to focus sunlight and ignite papyrus is historically supported by Archimedes' defense of Syracuse against Rome. As I bowed to Heraclid's bust, the crowd followed suit, praying for such divine favor in their own deaths. Though exhausted, the citizens remained enthralled by the unprecedented series of rituals. The final and most important event remained, entering the temple to pray. Soldiers maintained order as citizens entered in groups. Canios, his perception of Hades greatly improved, was eager to explore the interior. At the entrance stood 2 statues, a handsome youth playing a harp on the left, and a beautiful woman gazing at him with a gentle smile on the right. The white marble statues were lifelike, capturing a poignant, beautiful moment between the two. As Canios admired them, someone exclaimed, "Are these Orpheus and his wife Eurydice?" Canios checked the base and confirmed their names. He recalled the legend. Orpheus, son of Apollo, descended into the underworld to rescue Eurydice with his music. Hades allowed her to follow him, provided he did not look back. He failed at the last moment, losing her forever and dying in grief. Yet, these statues depicted them not in sorrow, but in warmth and happiness. Influenced by this peaceful mood, Canios entered the main hall. He noted the inscription above, Hall of Heroes. The Hall of Heroes was a side chamber adorned with murals depicting the mercenaries' journey, their struggles, battles against barbarians, and the founding of the Alliance. Kanios bowed before the brazier in respect before exiting. To the right lay the Hall of Sages, already filled with visitors. Kanios walked straight ahead, crossing the middle gate into the temple's main sanctuary. The hall, over 20 meters high, makes visitors feel minuscule. A 10-meter bronze statue of Hades stands at the front, yet instead of a fearsome visage, he appears as a kind, elderly sage. Beside him, Persephone clings to his arm, smiling. This depiction of the feared lord of the underworld alongside his queen creates an unexpected sense of intimacy. The floor is polished, vibrant marble, while the walls feature murals of lush forests, green mountains, and harmonious scenes of humans and mythical beings. Sunlight streams through the ceiling and windows, illuminating the hall like a paradise. Many Dionysian citizens, mesmerized, whisper, Elysium. This is the Elysian fields, and kneel before the sacred fire. Soldiers tasked with maintaining order must repeatedly urge the crowds to move along. Kanios marvels at the Dionysians' bold ingenuity, transforming the underworld into a paradise and a fearsome god into a benevolent one. With such a welcoming atmosphere, the temple is guaranteed to draw worshippers. Leaving the temple, Kanios reflects on the beauty he witnessed. The other temple was terrifying. Many didn't dare enter. Really? It was wonderful. If the soldiers hadn't urged me, I would have stayed longer. That side is completely different. See for yourself. Kanios is stunned by the chatter. A second temple? He realizes the designers split the structure into two, a dual-god temple. This explains why the building is twice the length of a standard one. Driven by curiosity, Kanios walks past the massive Doric columns to the other side of the complex. Indeed, there is another entrance, equally crowded. Two black stone statues flank the door, Charon the ferryman and Cerberus the hound. Their grotesque forms make Kanios shudder. Inside, the prison of the wicked features a menacing statue of Thanatos holding a sword. Black inscriptions on the walls warn, traitors, murderers, and rapists shall enter this prison. Blood-red skulls mark the end of each sentence, and the murals depict gruesome scenes of souls being tortured, chilling the viewers to the bone. Kanios stumbles out, hesitant to proceed, until he spots a side hall labeled Confessional with the promise, "Repent your sins, and the gods shall forgive." Steadying himself, Kanios enters the main hall. It is a world of black marble and shadow, without windows or a ceiling opening. The only light comes from flickering fire basins, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the faces of the worshippers. Here, the Hades statue is different. He wears black robes, holds a bident, and bears a stern, judging expression. Before him stand three 8-meter statues of the judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. The central judge holds a scale, with a single, vivid red heart in one pan, the only splash of color in the room. It forces every believer to confront their own conscience. Kanios staggers out, feeling as though his soul has been put to the test. Looking back from the hill, he is awestruck by the monumental structure. Those leaving one side are joyful, while those from the other are somber and reflective. The Dionysians have perfectly captured the duality of heaven and hell in one temple, a stroke of genius that will surely influence their people. At dusk, the bustle of Thurii continues, with the temple festival the main topic of conversation at the famous Christoia restaurant. Kanios eats his bread and mutton soup, listening to the chatter. He learns that the temple's design and the festival rituals were all directed by Archon Davos. His curiosity about this leader grows. Kanios had seen me from afar at the festival, young yet imposing. He feels a pang of frustration that he hasn't been granted an audience. A man asks to share his table. Kanios nods. The man orders a large plate of tripe and adds a pungent shellfish sauce. Kanios finds the smell odd, but the stranger eats with relish. "Delicious. I've been craving this for months," the man says, looking blissful. He tells Kanios, "When the Greek mercenaries were in Persia, I won over my men with this very dish, which is how I first gained notice before becoming their leader." Note: the dual-god temple concept was later mirrored by Hadrian's Temple of Venus and Roma. Placeholder for empty source paragraph. Kanios studies the man. Thin, sharp-featured, with a hawk-like nose and an intelligent air. The man smiles. I saw you at the guest house. I am Cypros, from Tarina. Kanios hesitates. I am from Elia. Cypros isn't surprised. I've been to Elia. Tarina and Elia share similar struggles. We face the Brudians, you the Lacanians. But we have allies. You fight alone. This shared plight draws Kanios closer to Cypros. You're here to seek aid from Dionia for Elia, Cypros guesses. Kanios admits. Elia seeks an alliance. Don't worry, Cypros reassures him. Dionia will ally with you. Kanios is shocked. He had feared Dionia would find weak Elia uninteresting. Why are you so sure? Because Elia's location is vital for Dionia to unify Lucania, Cypros explains. Unify all of Lucania? That's impossible, Kanios exclaims. It is possible. Dionia's political system drives its ambition, Cypros says firmly. Kanios whispers, you mean? Dionia has a tyrant. He recalls the aggressive, greedy tyrants of Syracuse and Rhegium. Cypros shakes his head. Not exactly. I am the military and religious head, but I am also the lead senator. I cannot act alone. I need the Senate's majority vote. I am constrained by law, unlike a typical tyrant. Yet, I hold more power than a standard general. Kanios muses. I heard he walks the streets without guards, unlike Dionysius. He sounds like a democratic king. A democratic king. Cypros agrees excitedly. That is exactly what he is, and that system is why Dionia is rising so fast. Is it all Davos is doing? Kanios asks. Cypros praises my military, political, and commercial acumen, calling me God-favored, but notes the unique political structure is key. He pauses, his throat dry. Kanios, try the beer. It's a specialty I developed. Kanios is intrigued. 2 jars of beer. Cypros shouts. Kanios takes a sip of the cool, golden liquid, feeling instantly refreshed. Good, right? Cypros asks. Kanios nods, eager to hear more about the Dionian system. Cypros explains. In most cities, the assembly of citizens holds supreme power, and generals are merely executors. It's slow and prone to deadlock. That is how Elia and most Greek cities operate, Kanios agrees. Cypros notes that Dionia's system, influenced by Tarentum and Sparta, replaced the assembly with a senate and a single, lifetime archon. They abolished the assembly? Kanios is stunned. It hasn't been held, Cypros says. Dionia is complex. Greeks, locals, various city-states. An assembly would just lead to endless, unproductive bickering. Kanios admits. Even in Elia, we struggle to reach consensus. I see your point. Cypros explains that in times of crisis, cities like Tarina appoint a plenipotentiary general to avoid the paralysis of the assembly. Elia does the same with a dictator, Kanios notes. Cypros continues. Dionia took it further. By bypassing the assembly and using the Senate's experience, they passed laws quickly. 2, in particular, fueled their rise. Placeholder for empty source paragraph. Which 2? Kanios leans in. First, Cypros says, anyone can apply for Dionian citizenship. Foreigners, prisoners, even freed slaves. Kanios gasps. Doesn't that devalue citizenship? How do they maintain order? It's highly attractive, Cypros counters. Every new citizen receives 5 acres of land, and more for military service. That alone drives people to them. Is that true? Kanios is stunned, realizing the immense appeal of land to the people of Elia. It's true. Why else would Dionia, despite having fewer troops, easily recruit 7,000 fierce freemen during the decisive battle against Croton? It's the allure of Dionian citizenship, Cypros said, gesturing to the bustling crowd. Look at the tens of thousands attending today's festival without chaos. Kanios realized. I've never seen a festival this large without major disorder. It can't just be the patrols maintaining order. It's the laws, Cypros whispered. Thurii has more than just patrols. It has courts. Violations are recorded, affecting a freeman's path to citizenship or a citizen's land allocation. People obey the law for a better future. A brilliant method. It fosters a habit of obedience, Kanios praised. It solves the chaos inherent in a diverse population. Who proposed this? Seeing Cypros smile, Kanios realized. Me again? Cypros nodded. Kanios shrugged, speechless at the Archon's genius. What is the second law? Kanios asked eagerly. Subordinate cities, Cypros said, his eyes gleaming. Dionia handles them differently than most Greek states. How so? Kanios asked. Take Asprostum, for example. I've heard of it, a former Bruteion town, once a Crotonian subordinate, now part of the Dionian alliance. When Croton took it, they slaughtered the Bruttians, moved in their own landless citizens, and imposed Crotonian law. Yet, Asprostum rebelled twice. What? Cypros asked, mocking the old system. Kanios was surprised. Twice. Yes. Croton suppressed them and kept it quiet. Over time, new residents married locals, but their children couldn't become Crotonian citizens. The locals grew to love their home more than Croton. Croton treated them like slaves, forcing them to the front lines and favoring their own citizens in disputes. Resentment was inevitable. Kanios nodded, drinking his beer. Croton's response was always more slaughter and forced migration. It's a common, failed strategy among Greek states. Often, the mother city and colony become enemies, Cypros lamented. Kanios, thinking of Ilia's own indifferent mother city, sighed. You're right. How does Dionia handle it? Kanios asked. Dionia's first act was to declare, all Asprostum residents who stay shall become Dionian citizens. Kanios was stunned. The second act was to appoint a city magistrate from the Senate. Currently, it's Silas, a close ally of mine. Since they are now Dionian citizens, their children are Dionian by birth. Any citizen can apply for office, and with experience, become a senator. Cypros said excitedly, this prevents rebellion. Asprostum is now a core part of the alliance, contributing taxes and troops. This is why Dionia can mobilize resources equal to Croton's despite being smaller. Every new territory strengthens the alliance. Empty, Nerulum and Gramentum are now part of the alliance, and many Lacanians are citizens. Why would they hate Dionia? With Ilia's help, Dionia can pacify Lucania. That's why they'll ally with you. Kanios pondered this. Aren't other states in the South Italy alliance afraid of Dionia's growth? Cypros drank deeply. Regardless, Dionia's strength brings peace. They are friendly to allies, unlike the brutal Syracuse. Kanios knew of Dionysius's massacres and enslavements. He wondered if that brutality was the real reason these states sought Dionia's protection. Have other states tried to copy these laws? Cypros laughed bitterly. I asked Crotonian counselors today. It's impossible. Would their citizens share their wealth and rights? Kanios realized the truth. Exclusive Greek citizens would never allow outsiders to share their power. Then why does it work in Dionia? My immense power and prestige, Cypros said. Kanios agreed. Such a leader was impossible in Ilia. However, Cypros hesitated. This new alliance has its own problems. What problems? Cypros saw a waiter approaching and fell silent. The next morning, the Temple of Hades celebration continued. I, as high priest, presided over the manumission of slaves in the name of Hades. These were mostly public slaves who had performed well, alongside some from my own household. Calixituoia's businesses were expanding, and she freed high-performing slaves to incentivize others and set a moral example, easing social tensions. Among them was Asuna, Calixituoia's maid, who chose to stay as a paid employee. Freed slaves were required to register as reserved citizens immediately. The ceremony was followed by festivities. Plays were performed in the new theater, but the public was more excited for the football tournament. With teams from 8 cities, including the newly joined Gramentum, the competition was fierce. Dignitaries watched as teams paraded into the arena. The crowd cheered wildly. Amicles cheered for Castron, shouting, "Look at Gorgies and our men, strong as Lacanian bulls." The crowd laughed. Kinagarata explained to the Crimissa senators that Castron had joined to prove their courage after being mocked for skipping last year's tournament. The visitors were infected by the Dionian fervor. They saw the Crimissa team, mostly new faces. Antorus knew many Dionian citizens had recently moved to Crimissa for land. He saw former Crimissa citizens now fully integrated into the Dionian team. Antorus felt conflicted. I look forward to Crimissa's performance, Kinagarata said. They'll outperform Castron, Antorus joked. The 8 teams stood in the center. I stood, and the arena fell silent. I spoke. Centuries ago, Zeus created the Olympic Games to replace war with peace. A year ago, Hades gave us football. It brings health, joy, unity, and friendship. Today, we compete to honor Hades. Fight well, players. Empty. The crowd sang the hymn to Hades, and the games began. The 8 teams were split into 2 groups, with Thurii and Amandalura as the seeded teams. The tournament groups are set. Group A includes Thurii, Nerulum, Crimissa, and Grimentum. Group B includes Amandalura, Laos, Castron, and Asprostum. Teams play a single round robin. Wins earn 1 point, losses 0, no draws. Ties are broken by head-to-head records. The top 2 teams from each group advance to the knockout stage to determine the champion. To ensure a strong start, I scheduled the evenly matched Thurii versus Nerulum as the opening game to captivate the audience. The crowd erupted as the teams entered. Thurii fans cheered for their home side, while Lacanians supported Nerulum. Teigitos and Lazuru were the most celebrated names, the former a powerful, sturdy running back, the latter a swift and agile one. Baguil, a senator, watched with intense envy, shouting and gesturing. Had he not been busy as the magistrate of Grimentum, he would have been on the field rather than the sidelines. Assists teased him. As magistrate of Grimentum, you should support your own team. Nerulum is your main rival for the knockout stage. You should want them to lose. Baguil glared at him, momentarily conflicted. The referee blew the whistle, and the match began. Though Crotonians initially dismissed the sport, the fierce collisions and tactical depth soon captivated the visiting dignitaries. Ascamas, a Crotonian general and navy commander, was particularly impressed. This is far more interesting than the Spartans' stone-throwing games. It's perfect for us. Why, someone asked. Ascamas pointed to the field. It's about offense and defense. It requires immense strength, speed, and courage, exactly what our athletes excel at. His words drew nods from fellow Crotonians, who dominated wrestling and boxing and possessed deep expertise in training for explosive power. We must convince the assembly to adopt rugby, Ascamas declared, his eyes flashing with a mix of admiration and competitive fire. We will defeat these Dionian teams next year. Just then, Teigitos scored a touchdown for Thurii, sending the crowd into a frenzy and further fueling Ascamas' resolve. Other Crotonians echoed his sentiment, eager to reclaim their pride on the field and prove their superiority over the Dionians. Lysias frowned, his mind elsewhere. He reflected on the Greek world's major games and Croton's failed attempts to host a regional tournament due to lack of influence and internal conflicts. He realized that Dionia's rugby tournament, by drawing in so many cities, was evolving into a regional athletic event. Was this intentional? Lysias watched me, the seemingly gentle Archon who had stabilized new territories and captured Grimentum in mere months. Meanwhile, Croton's assembly remained paralyzed by debates over citizenship and land redistribution. Comparing Dionia's rapid growth to Croton's stagnation, Lysias felt his confidence waning. Croton was being left behind. He felt helpless against the inefficiency of Croton's democracy. He began to wonder if joining the South Italy alliance was the only correct decision Croton had made. He dismissed his companion's talk as naive. Regardless of who won next year, Dionia would remain the ultimate victor. On the 3rd day of the tournament, I received the Elian envoy, Canios. I welcomed him warmly. Having learned more about the Dionian alliance, Canios shed his initial reserve, and the two engaged in a friendly dialogue. I listened to Ilia's plight and discussed the situation in Campania and Samnium. The conversation was productive, culminating in Ilia joining the Dionian alliance. Canios felt a weight lift from his shoulders as I solemnly promised military aid against any aggressor. I also hinted that I expected Ilia's cooperation in future operations within Lucania. Canios agreed readily, relieved to finally have a powerful protector against the nightmares that had plagued Ilia for decades. As Canios left the reception room, he felt buoyant. Suddenly, he saw someone waving at him. Cypros? Canios returned the gesture, filled with confusion. My lord, Aristocratides asked, now that Ilia is an ally, should we still negotiate with the envoys from Pixis, Patincia, and Garagusso? I watched Canios leave, feeling closer to my goal of integrating Lucania. I think, Aristocratides suggested, we should exploit their weakened state and surprise them before they learn of Ilia's alliance. I shook my head. A surprise attack is not suitable right now. Why, my lord? Grimentum is unstable, I explained calmly. It will take Bagul a year or two to win the hearts of the diverse tribes there. A premature attack elsewhere could trigger a revolt, repeating the tragedy of Thurii. Empty, aristocratides recalled the Thurii tragedy, the disastrous campaign 2 years ago where troops were lost in the mountains. Still, he was reluctant to let the opportunity pass. Aristocratides, I smiled. Who is stronger, us or Pixis and Potentia? We are by far. Then we must eat like bread. Chew slowly and swallow to build our own strength, rather than gorging until we choke. Aristocratides understood. They needed to solidify their base in central Lucania before crushing their rivals through sheer force. We will negotiate non-aggression pacts with them to keep them quiet, but keep the terms short, I said, a hint of ruthlessness in my tone. As for Garagusso, we shall pursue trade and alliance. I paused as I heard voices outside. An interesting guest has arrived. Aristocratides looked up as Labazo ushered in the visitor. It was Cypros. Cypros, the Terina envoy, was known for his sharp mind and keen observation. He had been a vocal supporter of the South Italy alliance and had even marched with the First Legion. I had once called him a clever man who knows how to adapt. He was a key guest for the Temple of Hades celebration. I, recalling intelligence about Cypros's recent meeting with the Ilian envoy, prepared myself. I knew that Dionia's rise and unique political system were drawing attention. Cypros, our best friend, welcome. I greeted him warmly. Cypros bowed respectfully. Archon, I come out of necessity. My city has an urgent proposal. I gestured for him to sit. Cypros glanced at Aristocratides, hesitating. He is my secretary, Aristocratides. You may speak freely. Cypros nodded and asked, Do you know of the Brutii? I smiled. They are indigenous tribes to the west. They are fewer in number than the Lacanians and have been less of a threat, though they often raid Terina. Not just Terina, Cypros noted, but also Asprostum and southern Thurii. But they have ceased their harassment since the alliance was formed, I replied. That is not just because of our military victories, Cypros said, his voice rising. It is because of a major change within the Brutii themselves. What change? I asked, my expression remaining calm. Cypros grew grave. Last year, the Brutii chieftains gathered in Cosenza to discuss forming a tribal league. I leaned forward, shocked. I had previously downplayed the Brutii threat to maintain leverage, but this was a game changer. I knew the Brutii were historically fractured. Cosenza was the strongest, while others like Vergae, Bycinia, and Nepetia were often at odds. The Brutii Mountains were a natural fortress. If these warring tribes united, they would pose a massive threat to Dionia's borders. It is true, Cypros confirmed. The Brutii Tribal League was formed this May. They elected Pienluin of Cosenza as the great chieftain, with other leaders serving as elders. I stood up, pacing slowly. Where did you get this information? Seeing my intense reaction, Cypros felt confident that he had captured the Archon's full attention. I was deeply concerned about the Brutii forming a tribal alliance, not just for the potential threat to the Dionian League, but because I had long been planning to address the Brutii issue. With Croton defeated and the South Italy alliance established, the Dionian League faced no significant rivals in southern Italy. Regium remained neutral, focused on trade, while Locri was buffered by the South Italy alliance. Syracuse, my primary concern, was bogged down by Carthage. Thus, I aimed to secure southern Italy as a stable base, with the Brutii being the final variable. The Brutii region was mountainous and infertile, but its geography forced Dionian territory into a precarious, thin S shape. This narrow coastal corridor lacked depth, making it vulnerable to invasion and stretching supply lines thin. I, wary of these strategic weaknesses, turned my attention to the Brutii Mountains. Controlling the Brutii Mountains would unify Dionian territory. Existing mountain trails could be improved into vital supply routes, and soldiers could move quickly between the east and west coasts. Furthermore, the Brutii were fragmented and weak, making them prime targets for conquest. I planned to act after stabilizing my new territories. Though Izum's scouts had failed to gather intelligence due to language barriers, the arrival of the Terina envoy, Cypros, brought critical information. Cypros explained that a unique tribe of Greeks and slaves, known as the Sorin, meaning Hieron, had formed in the Bruttii region. Tarina had long maintained secret trade ties with them, using them as a source of intelligence to preempt Bruttii raids. Cypros emphasized that the Sorin had recently reached out in desperation, as the unification of the Bruttii tribes threatened their very survival. I asked for the tribe's name, and Cypros confirmed it was Sorin. I realized this Greek tribe had survived by playing factions against each other, likely acting as mercenaries or black market traders. With the Bruttii now unified, this tribe's survival was at risk. I questioned why the Bruttii had centralized power instead of forming a loose alliance like the Lacanians. Cypros could only offer a wry smile, suggesting they might have learned this centralization from their neighbors, as the region remained surprisingly stable. I was struck by the realization a centralized Bruttii power was far more dangerous to Dionia than a loose tribal confederation. I asked if Tarina had a specific proposal. Cypros urged Dionia to lead the South Italy alliance in a preemptive strike against the Bruttii before their new alliance became an unstoppable threat. I hesitated, noting that war was a major undertaking and the Senate would need time to deliberate following their recent conflicts. Cypros nodded in understanding. I invited Cypros to stay in Thurii to experience Dionian life and facilitate further discussions. Cypros accepted, praising Thurii's architecture, cleanliness, and unique cuisine. I did not press Cypros on the defects of Dionian politics, preferring to keep my secret surveillance network hidden from outsiders. While such systems were not new, Syracuse's Hieron had used them. I knew my regime's greatest weakness, the lack of a citizen assembly. Dionia remained stable because the war-weary population craved security. The disenfranchised freemen were accustomed to their status, and the Lacanians were used to rule by elders. I knew this stability was temporary, but felt prepared. In late July, Dionysius launched a full-scale assault on the Carthaginian stronghold of Motia. Using a causeway to reach the island, the Syracusans employed ballistae to suppress the defenders and battering rams to breach the walls. Dionysius believed victory was imminent, but the true battle was just beginning. Knowing that surrender meant death due to long-standing hatreds, the Motians chose to fight to the last. Motia was densely populated, forcing residents to build 6 to 7-story tower-like homes. As Syracusan soldiers entered the city, they were met with fierce resistance from every building, with residents raining stones, javelins, and boiling oil upon them. Dionysius paused to construct massive, 6-story mobile siege towers. Once ready, the towers were pushed into the city, allowing Syracusan soldiers to bridge the gap to the rooftops. The Motians fought back with fire and pitch, leading to a brutal, chaotic battle in the air. The fighting stalled as the Motians resisted with desperate ferocity. Meanwhile, in Sparta, King Agesilaus and the elders were distracted by a dangerous internal conspiracy. Cynodon, a former Spartan citizen demoted to an inferior class, had grown to despise the Spartan system's oppression of helots and the inequality faced by the perioikoi and lower classes. Exploiting widespread dissatisfaction caused by war and heavy taxes, Cynodon organized a massive rebellion involving all disenfranchised strata. A fearful participant eventually betrayed the plot to the Gerousia. The Spartan leadership, panicked, sent Cynodon on a mission to cleanse the helots, a standard practice to maintain terror and train young warriors. Cynodon saw this as an opportunity to incite the rebellion. However, he was quickly ambushed and arrested. Under torture, he revealed his co-conspirators. The Ephors paraded the battered Cynodon through the city, branding him a traitor who sought to become king. Cynodon was beaten to death by Spartan warriors before he could speak. While the leadership eliminated the leader, the conspiracy ran deep, and the government remained occupied with stabilizing the state. The Dionian rugby tournament was a massive success, drawing crowds from across Magna Graecia. Magistrate Cunigurata increased patrols to maintain order. The final match was contested between Thurii and Amendolara. Amendolara narrowly won, avenging their previous loss. As the crowd prepared to leave, the host announced a demonstration of a new sport, football. The audience watched with curiosity as the rules were explained. Staff marked the field, and set up goals. The players took the field, and the referee held a round ball. The match began. The crowd was amazed to see players using their feet and bodies to control the ball, with hands strictly prohibited. The audience was captivated by the players' agility and the excitement of the goals. Observers realized Dionia had invented another sport destined to sweep Magna Graecia. The host announced that a football tournament would be held the following year. Merchants and citizens alike left, buzzing with talk of the new sport. Meanwhile, in the Senate, a messenger arrived from Tarentum. Tarentum had recently captured the Messapian strongholds of Manduria and Brundisium, doubling their territory. Despite their success, the Tarentines remained vigilant, reinforcing their defenses against a potential Messapian counterattack, though the region had remained quiet for months. Tarentum's Senate strategically deployed young Archytas to defend the vital, distant Brundisium, while leaving the closer Manduria lightly guarded. They assumed the Messapians lacked the strength to assault both cities simultaneously, and that Tarentine forces could easily reinforce either location. 5 days into the Festival of Hades, Archytas received a messenger from the Senate while inspecting the port of Brundisium. Manduria is under attack? How many enemies? Archytas asked, surprised. Scouts report at least 10,000, launching a fierce assault. The Senate has sent 2,000 men to hold them back for now. Empty. The messenger relayed the order. Diomedes believes this is the Messapians' final effort. You are to leave a garrison at Brundisium and march with the rest of your troops to join reinforcements from Heraclea and Metapontum. Then crush the Messapians at Manduria to secure our new territories. Archytas pondered the situation. Tarentum had suffered 5,000 casualties taking these cities, and the Messapians had suffered equally. With only Rudii being a major city, he doubted they could field another 10,000 men. He wondered why they targeted Manduria instead of the more exposed Brundisium. He quickly realized his mistake. Brundisium held 8,000 Tarentine citizen soldiers, while Manduria had only 2,000. The target was obvious. He asked the messenger, how many men did Metapontum and Heraclius send? Only 3,000 combined. Due to their previous losses, the messenger replied. Archytas felt a pang of bitterness. Tarentum kept the spoils while allies took the losses. Yet this was exactly how Dionia expanded so rapidly. His guilt faded, replaced by curiosity about the Dionian League. Did the Senate send an envoy to Dionia for aid? The messenger shook his head with a strange expression. Archytas understood. Diomedes and the Senate loathed the idea of begging a young, rising power for help, fearing it would damage Tarentum's prestige. As a 300-year-old power, Tarentum viewed Dionia as an equal, or perhaps even a superior, rival. They would only seek aid as a last resort. Archytas decided, Pibericis will remain with 2,000 men at Brundisium. I will take 6,000 back. You must accompany me, as I lack the cavalry to escort you separately. The messenger, terrified by Messapian light cavalry that had already claimed his escorts' lives, readily agreed. By afternoon, the Tarentine citizen soldiers departed. Despite Tarentum's disdain for Dionia, they had adopted Dionian policies, promising land and citizenship to freemen who settled the new territories. Many families had arrived, and they watched the departure with anxiety, fearing the reduced defense. Archytas chose the northern route toward Tarentum. It was safer, avoiding the Messapian-held forests near Rudii, though he had to watch for the town of Egnatia. Shortly after leaving, scouts reported a small group of Messapian cavalry nearby. Archytas remained calm. Messapian cavalry frequently harassed supply lines, but they were easily repelled by heavy infantry and archers. He planned to build new outposts to secure the area once the situation stabilized. He organized his 6,000 men into a column 3 miles long, with light infantry protected by heavy citizen soldiers. He estimated they would reach Tarentum by evening. Archytas maintained a steady, controlled pace. As time passed, the number of Messapian cavalry increased, harassing his scouts and forcing me to pull my own cavalry back, leaving me blind to the surroundings. Feeling uneasy, I ordered the troops to accelerate toward the outpost of Sigan. Sigan was a fortified village with walls and watchtowers, designed to defend against Messapian incursions. Bugles sounded to hurry the soldiers, but suddenly, a loud, unfamiliar bugle call echoed from the front. The vanguard panicked. That's an attack signal. I immediately ordered the column to halt and deploy into a defensive formation, light infantry in front and heavy infantry in the rear. Officers scrambled to organize the lines as I rode to the front. Facing the Messapian cavalry, I wondered, if the main Messapian force was at Manduria, how many men could they possibly have left to block my path? The column deployed amidst a cacophony of shouting and movement. I watched the horizon. A line of black dots appeared, growing into a dense formation of shields, bronze helmets, and spears. Because they used Athenian-style equipment, it was impossible to immediately distinguish them from Tarentine troops. As they drew closer, my adjutant screamed, "General, it's the army from Egnatia." Egnatia was a northern border city that had previously been repelled by Archytas during the siege of Brundisium. I realized my northern outposts must have been destroyed, as I had received no warning of their approach. With the mind of a mathematician, I quickly calculated the enemy force, fewer than 3,000 men. Archytas was uneasy. 3,000 men daring to block his path home suggested a trap. The Messapian cavalry charged. Archytas retreated into his formation as his peltasts prepared to fire. Empty, the Messapian cavalry veered off, exposing their infantry phalanx. The Messapian line halted, standing in a standoff 100 meters away. Feeling uneasy and holding a numerical advantage, Archytas ordered the charge. Unlike other Tarentines, Archytas admired the Dionysian League. He had studied my tactics, incorporating specialized, independent peltast units into his own army. As peltasts engaged, Archytas positioned himself on the right flank, preparing to outflank the enemy. Messapian cavalry swarmed the perimeter, pelting the Tarentines with javelins to disrupt their advance. Archytas ignored the harassment, keeping his heavy infantry focused on the charge. A deep, resonant horn blast echoed across the field. Archytas was shocked. The sound came from behind. Panic rippled through his rear ranks as enemy silhouettes emerged from the morning mist. Ambushed, Archytas faced a split-second choice: press forward or retreat. He had defied Senate critics by commanding from outside the phalanx, a decision that now allowed him to react. He ordered the army to halt and execute a complex left-rear withdrawal to face the new threat. Messengers and trumpeters relayed the desperate order. Though such a maneuver was difficult, Archytas trusted his disciplined, Dionysian-trained troops. He knew he couldn't crush the Western force quickly, so he chose to break contact and regroup. He was confident he could win a head-on battle. As the Tarentines retreated, the Messapian infantry charged, and their cavalry intensified their harassment. The ferocity of the Messapian cavalry shook Archytas. They were clearly determined to annihilate his force. Archytas struggled to decide between continued retreat or defensive consolidation. With cavalry closing in, the peltasts were forced to retreat, and the heavy infantry had to turn and fight, losing their momentum. Archytas ordered the peltasts to drive off the cavalry and instructed his officers to thicken the phalanx. He split his line into two parallel formations to protect their backs. He hoped to hold the line, but as the enemy emerged from the mist, the Tarentines realized they weren't just facing Messapians. They were facing a massive, poorly armored force. Pusicians, scouts reported. Archytas was stunned. The long-feuding Messapians and Pusicians had united. Tremoni, king of the Pusicians, and Timagoras, Archon of Egnatia, celebrated the encirclement of the Tarentines. Tremoni mocked the Messapians while ordering the final assault to clear the way for an attack on Brundisium. Half an hour later, the Tarentine standard still stood. The coalition's progress stalled as the Tarentines fought with desperate, concentrated strength. The coalition, numbering over 10,000, held a 2-to-1 advantage. Despite the encirclement, the battle remained a grueling stalemate. The coalition leaders watched the dust-choked battlefield with growing concern. Archytas rode through the center, shouting to boost morale. "Fight, sons of Terras. Every enemy you kill secures your families." Though his voice was hoarse and his horse exhausted, he was determined to inflict heavy losses even if he fell. The Tarentine formation shifted into a circle. Peltasts fired until their fingers bled, while the heavy infantry held the shield wall, stabbing and hacking with relentless discipline. An hour later, Tremoni was livid. His generals requested a pause, citing exhaustion and heavy casualties. Cowards! Tremoni raged at his commanders, threatening to replace them if they couldn't crush the outnumbered Greeks. Archytas is a renowned Tarentine general, and his troops are formidable, Timagoras advised Tremoni, suppressing his glee. We must reclaim Brundisium. We shouldn't waste our strength here. Are you suggesting we stop fighting? Tremoni retorted with a disdainful glare. The Tarentines fight to the death because they are trapped, Timagoras suggested with a sly smile. If we open a path in our encirclement. Tremoni, a seasoned commander, immediately grasped the implication. He turned his gaze toward the nearly 1,000 Messapian and Pusetian cavalrymen who had been sidelined by the total encirclement. I agree, Tremoni declared, masking his earlier hesitation. He pointed his spear at the Tarentine standard. But do not let Archytas escape. The Messapian-Pusetian coalition agreed to have the Egnatian infantry on the west side open a gap. Empty. Timagoras had inadvertently created a dangerous situation. A retreat during battle risks total collapse. The exhausted Tarentine soldiers, long trapped in a defensive stance, were stunned to see the enemy vanish, leaving a wide gap. Overjoyed, they seized the chance. The enemy is retreating. We've won, they cheered. Like drowning men clutching at straws, the soldiers surged through the gap, their joy overriding their exhaustion, pulling the rest of the army with them. Archytas realized too late that his army had become a flood, their morale and formation dissolving as they poured toward the opening. Hold your positions. Keep the formation. Archytas shouted in vain. The Pusetians pressed their attack, forcing the Tarentines to flee faster, and Archytas was swept along by the panicked crowd. General, it's useless. We must flee, his aide urged. Unable to stop the rout, Archytas heard the screams of his dying men. Panicked, he roared, "Follow me. We fight our way out." Archytas tried to rally his men to break through the Egnatians, but the soldiers, devoid of fighting spirit, ignored him in their desperate flight. Tarentine citizen soldiers lacked training, I lamented, wondering how I would have handled this. Distracted, I was pushed through the gap by my own guards. General, we must escape, the aide urged again. Escape to where? Enemy cavalry were slaughtering the fleeing Tarentines, and more were charging toward me. My unfinished lifting machines. I sighed, mourning my lost academic dreams and my failed ideal of a united Magna Graecia. I drew my sword and charged the enemy. As the sun set, the battlefield fell silent, littered with the dead. Tremoni and his generals stood over Archytas' body. The young military genius lay pierced by 3 javelins, his face serene. I thought he was someone important. He's just a beardless boy, a Pusetian general sneered. Tremoni silenced him with a glare. Cut off his head to show the Greeks in Brundisium, Tremoni ordered. Bury his body. By late night, the few survivors reached Tarentum, plunging the city into mourning. The Senate was more shocked by the Messapian-Pusetian alliance, which threatened Tarentum's survival. An emergency session revealed that at least 6 senators, including Archytas, were missing. They faced a dire situation. Brundisium would be besieged, Manduria was already surrounded, and 10,000 citizen soldiers had been lost in recent months. They lacked the strength for an offensive. Abandoning their hard-won territories was unthinkable, so they had to request reinforcements. Heraclea and Metapontum could only provide 3,000 to 4,000 men, insufficient against the 20,000-strong coalition. They needed a major power. Some proposed Sparta, their mother city. Others, led by Eutychus, suggested Dionia, a rising power that had never lost a battle. Syracuse was dismissed due to their ongoing war with Carthage. Most favored Dionia. Eutychus argued, "We helped me when I was a mercenary. We helped them occupy Amendolara. It is time they return the favor." The Senate agreed, satisfying their pride by framing the request as a chance for Dionia to repay us, despite their past failures to honor the alliance. Archytas is dead. I gasped in disbelief. Yes, General. The Tarentine envoy Polydorus replied sadly. Soldiers saw the Messapians take his body. Could he be a prisoner? I asked, unwilling to accept the truth. Even if he were, the Messapians would show him no mercy, Polydorus said. I knew the truth. The Messapians hated Archytas for his victories against them. Empty, I, usually hardened to death, was devastated. Arcadus had been a mentor and a friend who had helped me from my days as a mercenary to the rise of the Dionian League. With tears in my eyes, I vowed to Polydorus, "Dionia will help our ally. I will call the Senate immediately." Polydorus felt relieved. He knew I controlled the Senate and their support was guaranteed. The Senate approved the request without opposition. Remembering Tarentum's past aid, the senators voted unanimously to send reinforcements. However, the number of troops sparked debate. Cornelius and Burcos suggested 1 legion to avoid disrupting the harvest. Polixenes argued for 3,000 to 4,000 men, citing the need for Dionian troops to rest. Military leaders like Antonius and Capua argued for 2 legions to ensure a swift victory and maintain control over the campaign. The Senate deferred to me. I supported the 2-legion plan. We must show our sincerity. With 14,000 men, we will end this quickly. I assumed command, forgetting we were technically guests. Polydorus was overjoyed, promising Tarentum would provide all supplies. Burcos' agricultural department began planning to support the families of the departing soldiers. I chose to draw troops from Thurii and Amendolara, the bases of the 1st and 2nd legions, to minimize disruption. The Senate recalled soldiers preparing for the Isthmian Games. The Isthmian Games, held in honor of Poseidon, were one of the 4 great Greek festivals. I had learned of them from Lysias of Croton. Dionia was powerful but unknown in Greece and Asia Minor. Seeking to boost trade and attract freemen, I proposed sending athletes, a move the Senate enthusiastically supported. Western Greek colonies were more eager to participate than those in Asia Minor, using the games to flaunt their immense wealth, often drawing envy and mockery from the simpler mainland Greeks. Greeks in the Western Mediterranean excel in athletic games, with cities like Croton, Syracuse, Tarentum, and Locri producing numerous champions. They use these victories to prove to their mother cities that, despite being colonists, they have surpassed the citizens back home. My proposal merely continues this glorious tradition of Magna Graecia. Following the announcement, Dionian citizens signed up in droves, necessitating a selection process. 10 athletes, including Tegetinos, wrestling, Metones, javelin, Amintus, armed race, and Sobkos, chariot racing, qualified for Corinth, though they must now return to their legions for the Tarentum campaign. Despite the recent end of the war and the strength of the upcoming enemy, citizens are eager to fight. Beyond the prospect of land and citizenship, the establishment of the Hall of Heroes and the Hall of Sages in the Temple of Hades has fueled their desire for glory. As preparations intensify in Thurii and Amendolara, I, Felicius, Capus, and Drax meet with the Tarentine envoy, Polydorus, to discuss the Messapian and Pusetian forces. Polydorus recounts the legend of King Lycaon of Arcadia, who, after disrespecting Zeus by serving him human flesh, was transformed into a wolf and saw his kingdom destroyed. Felicius asks how this myth relates to the Messapians. Polydorus explains that Lycaon's 3 sons, Donios, Pusetios, and Messapos, fled across the Adriatic to settle in southern Italy. He identifies these sons as the progenitors of the Daunians, Pusetians, and Messapians. Felicius is stunned. Polydorus notes that these tribes, named after the brothers, have long been distinct, a fact well known to Tarentum through constant warfare. Capus worries that the Daunians might join the coalition, given their shared ancestry. Polydorus clarifies that despite their origins, these tribes have become distinct, populous nations with conflicting interests and long-standing rivalries. The Daunians occupy fertile northern plains, while the Pusetians, trapped between the Daunians and Messapians, are locked in a bitter struggle with the Daunians over the Ophanto River. Their mutual hatred makes an alliance impossible. I study a map of the region and ask about the political structures of these 3 tribes. Polydorus explains that the Messapians were once a unified kingdom under King Attis, who foolishly allied with Athens. After the Athenian defeat at Syracuse, Messapian nobles revolted, killed Attis, and established a confederation of city-states governed by elected officials and noble councils. The tone of Polydorus suggests this new Messapian confederation is a significant threat to Tarentum. He adds that the Pusetians and Daunians remain monarchies, though the Daunian king's power is constrained by local lords. I question why the rival Messapians and Pusicians would form an alliance. Polydorus suggests they were terrified by Tarentum's aggression. I realized Tarentum's strategy was to isolate the Messapians by seizing Brindisi and Manduria, slowly strangling them while relying on their superior navy. Polydorus speculates that the Pusicians prefer an alliance with their kin over foreign rule and hope to focus their strength against the Daunians. I suspect there are deeper, unstated reasons for this risky alliance. Capuz asks if the Pusicians fear a Daunian attack while their army is away. Polydorus notes that the Pusicians recently signed a truce with the Daunians after losing territory along the Ophanto. Capuz questions the reliability of such a truce. Polydorus dismisses the natives as unpredictable, noting the Pusicians are already on Tarentine soil. Drax, bored by the diplomacy, waits for the tactical details. He asks about the enemy's military characteristics. Polydorus explains that the Messapians were once disorganized raiders, but Athenian support, providing armor, weapons, and training, has made them formidable opponents. Drax asks about their cavalry. Polydorus notes their excellent horsemanship, including the ability to control mounts without reins and throw javelins while riding. I and Felicius exchange glances. Polydorus insists that despite their cavalry, their hoplites remain inferior to true Greek soldiers. Drax asks for troop numbers. Polydorus estimates the coalition at under 30,000, while the Tarentine-led force, including Dionian, Metapontum, and Heraclea troops, should exceed 30,000, making victory likely. After the envoy leaves, the leaders continue their deliberations. Drax suggests prioritizing the relief of Manduria to crush the enemy and secure supply lines before moving to Brindisi. Capuz fears Tarentum might force them to relieve the more vulnerable Brindisi first. Drax insists they must not agree to that. Felicius warns that failing to clear Manduria first risks being cut off and surrounded, urging them to secure independent command of the Dionian forces. I agree. I keep Felicius behind after the others leave. I ask about the state of mobilization. Felicius reports that while the legions are ready, equipment shortages persist due to limited local production capacity, despite the supply of hides from Lacanian citizens. I order the soldiers to use their old bronze gear and mention a Corinthian merchant, Theos, who might handle new orders. Felicius confirms Theos is willing. I consider keeping the new hydraulic forging technology secret by working only with trusted partners. Felicius notes that the Civilian Shipping Association will help transport the legions to Tarentum within 2 days. I ask how long mobilization usually takes for Greek city-states. Felicius says 3 to 4 days, compared to their 2. I ask about larger forces. When Felicius suggests they are faster, I order a 5-day delay. I ask why Tarentum is suddenly risking everything against the Messapians. Felicius realizes it is because of Dionia's rise. I confirm that Dionia's growth threatens Tarentum's hegemony, and we must exploit Tarentum's current desperation. I coldly decide we will fulfill our treaty obligations, but will not help Tarentum permanently secure its new conquests. My decision is purely political, unaffected by my friendship with Archytas. Felicius recognizes that my calculated, sometimes ruthless pragmatism is what elevated us from mere mercenaries to leaders of a power. Felicius accepts the order. I spend the following days gathering intelligence on the Bruttians. I also spend time with my family and review reports on Tarentum. Polydorus grows increasingly desperate as the Tarentine situation worsens. News arrives that Archytas has been killed, his head displayed by the enemy, and a mountain of corpses used to intimidate the defenders of Brindisi. Brindisi, with its damaged walls and few defenders, is on the verge of collapse. As the Tarentine Senate debates, word arrives that the Messapian army besieging Manduria has vanished. Senators Eumachus and Diomelas, unable to track the Messapian main force due to cavalry blockades, correctly deduced they were marching east to link with the Pusicians, threatening Brundisium. With reinforcements from Thurii weeks away, the Senate rejected a land march through the hostile coalition. They decided to transport troops by sea to hold Brundisium until the joint Dionian-Tarentine relief force arrived. Tarentum committed its entire naval strength, 80 vessels, including 40 triremes, to escort transports carrying 4,000 soldiers to Brundisium. The fleet was intercepted by the Messapian-Pusetian coalition near the Messapian port of Ridii. The coalition fielded 64 ships, including 25 triremes. While the Pusetians contributed little, the Messapians, skilled in trade and naval warfare thanks to Athenian influence, posed a serious threat in this, the largest naval engagement between the two powers. The battle began with the Messapians attacking aggressively, while the Tarentines, hampered by the need to protect their transports, fought cautiously. No content. After 4 hours, Tarentum lost 15 ships and 4 transports. The coalition lost 23 ships. The coalition withdrew, and the Tarentines, focused on rescuing survivors, abandoned the pursuit to reach Brundisium. Simultaneously, the coalition launched a final assault on Brundisium. The city fell just as the Tarentine relief force landed. In the ensuing chaos, panicked soldiers and civilians stampeded the docks, causing 2 ships to capsize under the weight of those desperate to escape. The naval commander ordered the fleet to pull away from the docks, but fighting between soldiers and sailors over space caused several more ships to be stranded. The coalition forces slaughtered the trapped Tarentines at the docks. The retreating Tarentine fleet, now overcrowded with refugees, lost its maneuverability and became easy targets for the pursuing coalition ships. Tarentine ships were rammed and sunk, and the fleet eventually fled with only 45 vessels remaining. The victorious coalition pursued the fleet, then turned west to besiege Manduria. With Tarentum in panic, they sent desperate pleas to Dionia. On the 5th day, the Dionian relief force finally departed. In early September, I led the 1st and 2nd legions from Victory Square to the Temple of Hades to pray for success. High Priest Plyzenas and his acolytes chanted the hymn to Hades, bestowing blessings upon the departing troops. I eschewed traditional divination, believing victory was forged through discipline, planning, and strength rather than divine favor. The army marched to the port of Thurii, cheered on by the citizens. Unlike other city-states, Dionian families encouraged their men to seek glory, while others envied the soldiers' opportunity to prove themselves. Polydorus noted the Dionians' martial fervor and the steady, mature leadership of the 20-year-old me. Realizing this was the secret to Dionia's rise. The strength of the Dionian army provided Polydorus with a sense of security. The troops boarded hundreds of ships in an orderly fashion, directed by their officers. Polydorus departed first to prepare the Tarentine Senate for the arrival of the Dionian forces. Antonius accompanied him to coordinate logistics, as I needed Felicius to remain in Thurii for security. Antonius was chosen over the aloof Alexis for his diplomatic tact. Engineers also traveled ahead to survey the site and plan the camp layout for immediate construction upon arrival. Soldiers stowed their gear, linothorax, shields, and weapons, and waved goodbye to their families. The fleet set sail. A strong northeast wind pushed the ships east across the Gulf of Taranto, soaking the soldiers but failing to dampen their spirits. A new recruit speculated about the wealth they might earn from the Tarentines. A veteran corrected him, noting that with 14,000 men, the spoils would be thin. He advised focusing on merit and land grants instead. Soldiers grumbled about the 3rd Legion's luck in seeing action in Lucania, fearing the Messapians might surrender like the Locrians. Another soldier dismissed this, noting the Messapians were fierce and unlikely to negotiate after their recent victories. The men cheered, eager to prove their worth as heroes. When a soldier joked about marrying Tarentine women, another warned that the arrogant Tarentines would never marry their daughters to farmers. Plyzenas asked for clarification. Sitarsis explained that while Tarentines were distant, they had only recently sought a defensive alliance due to the constant threat of the indigenous tribes. Haebatolosi claimed the Tarentines were not true Spartans, but descendants of slaves and Spartan women. The soldiers were shocked by this revelation. Haebatolosi recounted the legend of the Parthenii, claiming the Tarentines were exiled for their illegitimate origins. He was interrupted by shouts of warning. A soldier, Prosus, punched Haebatolosi, knocking him down. The other soldiers intervened to stop the fight. Prosus, enraged, continued to shout at Haebatolosi. Sitarsis reprimanded Prosus, warning him of military law. Haebatolosi retaliated, inciting a brawl on the deck. Sergeant Parmenius arrived to restore order, finding Hebetaloosi and others beaten. Parmenius's shout forced Prosus to stand down. Parmenius ordered him bound. Prosus submitted without resistance. Hebetaloosi complained about the unprovoked attack. Parmenius ignored him and questioned Sitarsis, his expression darkening. Parmenius demanded to know why Prosus had attacked his comrade. Prosus remained silent. Parmenius was troubled. The legions had recently expanded to form the 4th Legion. Prosus, a recruit from Argos, had been a standout in training, displaying exceptional skill and discipline. Matones had personally requested him for his unit, urging Parmenius to nurture his talent. However, Prosus was a loner, nicknamed the Stone by his peers, who resented his perceived arrogance. Parmenius decided to leave the matter to the military judge upon arrival. Tied to the mast, Prosus ignored the stairs, his thoughts turning to his mother. Prosus was actually Leotychides, son of the former Spartan king Agus. After his mother's suicide, he had fled Sparta. He chose the western Mediterranean to avoid Spartan influence, while positioning himself to eventually strike back at the city that had humiliated his family. Leotychides chose the Dionian alliance over Syracuse or Carthage, despite his Spartan background. He was intrigued by Dionia's audacity in defying Sparta during his earlier embassy, a sentiment echoed by the Epher Histiaves, who had previously praised the Dionian Archon's military talent. Upon fleeing to Magna Graecia, Leotychides discovered that Dionia, despite being less than 2 years old, had already become the most powerful city-state alliance in southern Italy. Impressed by Dionia's rapid rise, its unique governance, and its vibrant culture, especially after witnessing a triumph, Leotychides felt he had found his destiny. He decided to stay, living under an assumed identity. Using funds from his father Agesi, he applied for citizenship. His rigorous Spartan agoge training allowed him to excel in Dionian recruit drills, earning him status as a formal legionary citizen even before completing his reserve service. Yet, haunted by his mother's death and deep-seated hatred for Sparta, he remained an outsider. The term bastard remained a trigger for his volatile temper. Tarentum's harbor, a natural gourd-shaped formation, offered superior capacity and safety. The Tarentines reinforced the narrow openings with 2 water gates to bolster defenses. As the first gate opened, Dionian troop transports entered, directed toward the northwest corner of the bay. Tarentum, situated at the southeast, placed the reinforcements in this vulnerable area, hoping the Dionians would bolster their weakest defensive flank. I marveled at the calm waters within the gates, contrasting sharply with the crowded, storm-prone port of Thurii. I wondered how it compared to the famous harbor of Croton. Historical note: Archytas, the Pericles of Magna Graecia, was a brilliant mathematician and Tarentine leader who maintained prosperity without aggressive expansion. Plato viewed him as a philosopher king. He eventually died in a shipwreck. In this narrative, the butterfly effect caused by me led to Archytas' death in battle against the Messapi. I hope the Dionian Academy will eventually carry on his mathematical legacy. My ship bypassed the northwest landing, heading instead through the second water gate toward the main Tarentine port. Despite the wartime urgency, the port was overwhelmed with activity, delaying my docking. I observed the locals' cold, grieving demeanor. Many women wore black veils. There were no cheers. The shadow of defeat hung heavily over Tarentum. The Tarentine Senate, maintaining their pride, waited at the city gates rather than the docks. "They are here," someone shouted, drawing everyone's attention. I approached, my calm, steady demeanor striking the onlookers, though my youth as an Archon was immediately apparent. Eutychus nudged the contemplative Diomedes. Diomedes sighed. "I know, we need their help." He stepped forward. "Welcome, young Archon of Dionia. We have awaited your arrival like parched earth awaits rain. Thank the gods you are here." Eutychus worried I might take offense at the desperate tone. I apologized sincerely. I am sorry for the delay. As a young alliance, mobilizing nearly 20,000 men, 2/3 of our citizens, during the harvest season was a complex, unprecedented logistical challenge. "You are not late. You are just in time," Eutychus replied. "We are deeply grateful for your generous support." Polydorus introduced the Tarentine Archon, Eutychus. I bowed respectfully, sensing Eutychus's genuine goodwill. Polydorus then introduced the other Archon, Diomedes. Diomedes, with his sharp, stern features, clearly harbored prejudice against Dionia, yet I maintained my professional courtesy. I greeted the senators, noting that unlike the Spartan Gerusia, Tarentum's Senate was larger and elected annually by the citizens. Before Polydorus could finish, an elderly man lunged forward, accusing me of betraying the Pythagorean school by poaching their apprentices and luring them to Dionia with money. Tarentum does not welcome you, he spat. I, caught off guard, asked who the man was. Histiaves, Archytas' father, Polydorus whispered. I bowed deeply. Archytas was my dear friend. I will avenge him, defeat the Messapi, and recover his remains. Please, accept my condolences. We do not need Dionia to defeat the Messapi or recover my son. Histiaves retorted, eyes brimming with tears. Suddenly, a cavalryman galloped in, shouting, The fleet has returned. The fleet has returned. The senators immediately abandoned me and rushed toward the harbor. Polydorus explained the situation to me, and I expressed my understanding and suggested we inspect the scene together. Standing on the heights overlooking the harbor, they saw the Tarentine fleet returning. Polydorus counted the ships with trembling voice. Only 19 warships and 25 transports. I had to steady him to prevent him from collapsing. I frowned. The fleet had departed with 80 warships and 100 transports carrying 4,000 men. Losing over 3/4 of the fleet and thousands of sailors was a devastating blow to Tarentum's manpower. It served as a grim warning to me. Never transport troops by sea without absolute naval supremacy. The sound of wailing from the harbor moved even the battle-hardened me. After waiting in vain for stragglers, Polydorus gripped my hands, pleading, Lord Davos, Tarentum truly needs the full support of Dionia. I nodded, reflecting that with over 10,000 casualties, Tarentum's strength was severely compromised. The joint military conference was postponed as the Senate dealt with the aftermath. I was unbothered, using the time to oversee camp construction with my soldiers. A major naval defeat has far-reaching consequences, from mourning and repairs to economic stability. However, the urgent war situation forced Tarentum to prioritize a joint counter-offensive against the Messapian-Pusician coalition to relieve the threat to the city. Realizing I had neglected the Daunian Archon, Eumekas decided to visit me personally. Arriving at the camp, Eumekas was stunned. In just one day, the Daunians had erected a fortified city complete with trenches, palisades, and watchtowers. I had standardized camp construction. Materials were prefabricated in Thurii and assembled on-site, provided the logistics and roads allowed. Eumekas spotted Timaeus, a Tarentine theater owner, loitering near the camp. Timaeus complained that the war had ruined his business. With no one in the city wanting entertainment, he hoped to profit from the 20,000 Daunian reinforcements, but the guards refused him entry. Eumekas felt awkward, knowing Timaeus' business involved lowbrow plays and prostitution. He urged him to leave, warning him not to disturb the soldiers. Empty, Timaeus retorted that he had always served soldiers, including Eumekas himself, and his companions flirted with the Archon to bolster his argument. Annoyed but unable to cause a scene, Eumekas brushed them off and ordered the guards to announce his arrival. Timaeus tried to beg for entry, but Eumekas ignored him and entered the camp. When I emerged, Marcius drove the group away, leaving Timaeus cursing. I laughed, noting that a market had naturally formed. I remarked that while trade was convenient, prostitution was strictly forbidden under Daunian military law, punishable by the loss of citizenship. Eumekas blushed, acknowledging that such strict laws explained Daunia's military success. The conference was held at Eumekas' estate. I met Diomedes, Tryphias of Heraclea, and Tadepras of Metapontum. Diomedes was subdued, his arrogance crushed by the naval defeat. Tadepras was formal, while Tryphias greeted me warmly, reflecting their long-standing relationship since I established myself in Amendalara. Eumekas thanked the allies for their support during Tarentum's crisis. After formal pleasantries, they turned to business. Diomedes stated that Manduria was under siege by 30,000 coalition troops. He proposed an immediate relief force to prevent Manduria from suffering the same fate as Brundisium. He looked to me, as the other city-states were Tarentine subordinates. The others agreed, but I stood up to study the map. I asked for the distance to Manduria. Less than 50 li, Yumikas replied. I calculated that at a normal marching speed, we could arrive in 3 hours. I noted the geography, a coastal corridor between the sea and mountains, where Manduria was positioned to avoid Tarantine naval power. How wide is this corridor? I asked. 6 li at its narrowest, Yumikas answered. I considered the terrain and asked, how many soldiers is Tarentum preparing to send? As Yumikas prepared to respond, Diomedes snapped. Decide now whether to send troops. Don't waste our time with questions. Diomedes, Yumikas shouted, fearing his aggressive tone would provoke me. Diomedes had been incensed by my lack of respect for his status as Archon and my presumption in leading the meeting. However, recalling the Senate's instructions and Tarentum's dire situation, he swallowed his anger. I remained calm. War concerns the life and death of every citizen soldier and the fate of a city-state. We must be cautious. Can Tarentum afford another failure? Others were moved by my words, but Diomedes muttered, that's just an excuse for your cowardice. I chuckled, remaining silent. Cowardice? No one else agreed. My history of winning against superior numbers spoke for itself. In contrast, Tarentum's desperate plea for reinforcements suggested they were the ones truly afraid. Seeing Tryphaeus mocking them, Yumikas intervened to smooth things over. Lord Davos, please forgive Diomedes' rudeness. He is merely anxious about Tarentum's dire situation. Yumikas gestured for Diomedes to be quiet. Diomedes fumed but held his tongue. Tarentum will send 10,000 troops, Yumikas stated. With your reinforcements, we will have 27,000 men, matching the coalition. After relieving Manduria, our force will reach 31,000, enough to defeat the enemy. I pointed to Manduria on the map. What if the coalition refuses to fight and retreats instead? Impossible. The Messapians are hot-blooded and love battle. They view retreat as cowardice, Diomedes retorted. The Messapians aren't just reckless. They successfully ambushed Archytas, I countered. Their infantry is inferior to our hoplites, and their cavalry is hampered by the narrow terrain near Manduria. They are smart enough to avoid a disadvantageous battle. I pointed to the open ground between Manduria and Brundisium. This is their ideal battlefield. If they retreat, I added, our strength increases, but the coalition might simply vanish. Tryphaeus nodded. Heraclea had suffered heavy losses and hoped to force the enemy back without further bloodshed. Tedepres shared this sentiment. Yumikas and Diomedes exchanged worried glances, realizing a coalition retreat would be a strategic disaster for Tarentum. Greek city-states usually require swift victories. Prolonged wars drain resources and disrupt domestic order. Only Athens, Sparta, and Syracuse can sustain long campaigns due to their vast alliances. If the coalition retreats, the Daunian reinforcements will leave, and Tarentum will be left vulnerable again. They need a decisive victory now to reverse their decline. Empty. If they retreat, we will destroy Brundisium. That will force them to act. Diomedes growled. I was impressed. Diomedes realized Tarentum couldn't hold Brundisium, so destroying it would strike at the heart of the Messapian ambition without overextending Tarentum's forces. I viewed southern Italy as Daunia's backyard and wanted to prevent the Messapian Pucetian expansion. I agreed. I accept your proposal. Daunia will reinforce Manduria. Diomedes looked at me in surprise. Excellent. We march at dawn. Yumikas declared. The time is tight, Tryphaeus complained. Wait. Diomedes stood up. A ship needs one captain. We need a supreme commander to prevent chaos on the battlefield. Agreed, Yumikas added. We need unity. I suggest we vote for a commander, though major decisions will still be made collectively. Yumikas looked at me, implying the vote was a formality. Nominate your candidates. Who is Tarentum's commander? I asked. Archon Diomedes, Yumikas boasted. He is more capable than Archytas and knows the terrain well. I will act as the arbiter. I sneered internally. With Heraclea and Metapontum as Tarentum's vassals, the vote was rigged. I decided to fight for the position. A vote is unwise. War is cruel. A commander's skill determines the survival of thousands. We must choose based on merit and track record. Furthermore, I continued, in a coalition, soldiers prioritize their own city-states. Only a commander who can command absolute loyalty can ensure victory. Based on my record, I am the most suitable candidate. Diomedes jumped up. You are just a beardless boy. Daunian soldiers are as foolish as you. They cannot compare to Tarentine citizen soldiers. I replied calmly. A commander needs a cool head to handle complex situations. On that count, you are unfit. Diomedes was livid. Eumekas intervened. He knew I was the better choice, but the Tarentine Senate demanded he secure the command to maintain their prestige. Let us vote, Eumekas said, trapping me. Either follow my proposal or Davos's. Silence filled the room. I agree with Eumekas. Diomedes shouted. I remained silent. Eumekas felt relieved. Victory seemed certain. I support Lord Davos. A voice suddenly rang out. Everyone turned to look. Tryphius? Eumekas was stunned. Tryphius, repeat that. Who do you support? Diomedes demanded aggressively. Tryphius nervously avoided Diomedes's gaze, offering a forced smile to me. I realized. Heraclea was looking to switch allegiances to Daunia for protection. Tryphius felt Tarentum was a sinking ship. With the Messapian Pusician threat growing, Heraclea needed a stronger, closer protector than the failing Tarentum. I smiled and nodded at Tryphius. Interests always trumped empty alliances. Davos has never lost a battle. I firmly support him as Supreme Commander. Tryphius declared. I nominate myself. I added, seizing the momentum. The score was 1-2. Eumekas was devastated. The alliance was crumbling. Diomedes looked to Tadepras, hoping for a tie. Tadepras lowered his head. I abstain, Tadepras muttered. Diomedes knocked over his chair in shock. I abstain. Tadepras repeated. Eumekas felt his world go black. I was named commander and invited Eumekas to be my deputy to save face for Tarentum. Tryphius left with me, chatting happily. Diomedes cornered Tadepras. What is the meaning of this? Are you betraying us? Tadepras sighed. The Lacanians and Garagusso are encroaching on our land. We cannot handle them and the Messapians simultaneously. Tarentum will help you. Diomedes insisted. Can Tarentum afford another long war? Tadepras countered. Diomedes was silenced. Daunia is the dominant power in Lucania now. If they intervene, the Lacanians will listen. We need peace, not more war. Tadepras explained apologetically. Davos is a great commander. This is for the best. Tadepras knew he couldn't break away as easily as Tryphius, but he had to prioritize Metapontum's survival. Diomedes was left seething. Eumekas comforted him. At least now Davos is forced to commit his troops fully to the battle. Diomedes remained lost. His aggressive policies had backfired, uniting his enemies and alienating his allies. We must call a Senate meeting immediately, Eumekas said grimly. The alliance is changing. Diomedes was shocked and despondent. In mere months, Tarentum's status as a powerhouse faced a grave threat. How had things deteriorated so quickly? Was the young man right? That war determined a city-state's fate? If so, why was Daionia, barely 2 years old, growing stronger despite constant warfare? Meanwhile, in the Messapian Pusician coalition camp outside Manduria, the Messapian Archons and the Pusician King Tremoni discussed the latest intelligence. Are you certain Tarentum has received over 10,000 foreign reinforcements? Tremoni asked, his expression grave. Pachimerus, Archon of Rudii, replied. Our spies in Tarentum's port confirmed it. Timagoras even sent cavalry to scout the area. A massive camp has indeed been established. It is reinforcements from Tarentum's ally, Daionia. Carminus, Archon of Eugentum, added. Daionia is a league founded on the west side of the Gulf of Taranto. Their Archon is a young man who has never tasted defeat. Never tasted defeat. Tremoni scoffed. How many battles has he fought? Arcadus, the so-called military genius of Tarentum, still has his head hanging on the gates of Brundisium. He turned to Pachimerus, his tone hardening. Regardless, 10,000 reinforcements are a problem. We've gained no ground at Manduria in 2 days and have suffered heavy losses. I suggest we retreat. Once these Greeks leave, we can return to take the city. Tremoni's generals agreed, citing exhaustion, dwindling supplies, and the tactical disadvantage of facing fresh enemy reinforcements. The Messapian Archons exchanged glances. They suspected the Pusicians were using the difficulty of the siege as an excuse to renege on their agreement to co-manage the strategic port of Brundisium, now that they had already secured their share of the spoils. Pachimerus countered, "King of the Pusetians, if we retreat, we lose everything. Tarentum will not stop at saving Manduria. They will target Brundisium next. Can its weak walls and small garrison hold? If we disband this coalition now, we will never be able to reassemble it in time to save our kin from slaughter or slavery." Tremoni paused, realizing he had overlooked the fate of the 2,000 Pusetians recently settled in Brundisium. Pachimerus pressed on, "We have already dealt Tarentum a crippling blow. Their adult citizens are dead or maimed. They rely on youths and elders. If we continue to press them, they will be unable to resist us for a long time. Even if the city is hard to take, the surrounding lands will be ours." Tempted, Tremoni replied, "If we continue, we must avoid a direct field battle. Greek hoplites in formation are like unyielding stone." "You are the commander," Pachimerus said humbly. "We will follow your lead." Mollified, Tremoni said, "My suggestion is to lure the Tarentines out." The Dionian camp, being near Tarentum, was not heavily fortified. As I held a meeting, the rest of the camp rested. Per military law, 1 soldier per squad could take leave until sunset. With the army in a semi-alert state, Antonius, the military officer, ordered that soldiers remain near the camp and return immediately upon hearing the signal. Soldiers occupied themselves with organized games like tug-of-war, rugby, and football. Gambling was strictly prohibited under military law. Some soldiers used their leave to explore the outskirts of Tarentum, though they were barred from entering the city itself, forcing them to browse the market outside the camp. Tarentine merchants seized the opportunity to hawk their wares. Behold, hippo hide from Egypt. Thick and durable, perfect for light, sturdy armor. Brother, look at this double-edged Iberian short sword. It's the weapon that kept Carthage from conquering Illyria. The market was dominated by weapons dealers and food vendors. Taste these dates from Libya, sweeter than any fig. Salted ostrich meat from the Bedouins. It's the largest bird in existence, faster than a horse. Tarentum's trade goods were far more diverse than those in Thurii, as evidenced by this temporary market. The Dionian soldiers, flush with land grants and spoils of war, spent freely. Olivarus, having delegated his duties, strolled through the market to relax. He stopped at a stall, examining a palm-sized gold ornament. An idol of the Egyptian god Horus, crafted in Memphis, the merchant urged. "It grants his protection." Olivarus shook his head, placing it down. "A fine piece, but I worship Hades." The merchant argued that Greeks often worshipped multiple gods depending on the need, but Olivarus remained unmoved. As he walked away, the merchant cursed. "Dionians are stubborn fools." Previously, Olivarus would have argued back, but he now felt his position required more restraint. Further ahead, a fat merchant stood before several tents, shouting, 5 drachmae for the finest pleasure with the most beautiful girls in Tarentum." Olivarus frowned. Since his time in Persia, he had abandoned his former womanizing ways and now felt only disgust at such solicitations. He turned to leave, but Timaeus, a Tarentine theater owner, grabbed him. "Don't go. 7 drachmae for 2 girls. I'm losing money here." Olivarus shoved him away, sending Timaeus sprawling to the ground. Enraged, Timaeus scrambled up and screamed, "Damn Dionian bumpkins. You don't know how to enjoy life. That military law is just a lie invented by your lowborn Archon to strip you of democracy and freedom, turning you into slaves under his dictatorship." Olivarus heard the insults and marched toward the man in a rage. Nearby soldiers were equally incensed. The fat man had insulted not just them, but their great commander. In an instant, Timaeus was surrounded. Terrified by the sea of angry faces, he shrieked, "What are you doing? This is Tarentum." Before he could finish, Olivarus shouted, "Beat him," and punched the man's face. Tarentines in the market heard screams from the crowd, but dared not intervene. Blow, blow, blow. The bugle sounded. "Assembly," the soldiers cried. The Dionian soldiers abandoned their tasks and sprinted back to camp, leaving the market empty. Only the groaning theater owner remained. As the camp gates opened, the fully armed army marched out in 3 columns from the east, north, and south gates to maximize speed. Tarentine merchants watched the soldiers, previously so relaxed, now moving with disciplined, rapid precision. 2 legions departed, leaving behind the medical corps, engineering battalion, baggage train, and over 1,000 freeman reserves. These reserves performed vital labor and security duties, hoping to earn merit and accelerate their path to becoming reserve citizens. A Dionian legion, including support units, far exceeded 7,000 men. Finding only dirt roads in Tarentum, I organized the army into 4 columns, each 5 files wide, to advance across a broad front. Dust billowed as the army marched, creating a deafening roar. Tarentine onlookers felt a mix of unease and relief. The sheer scale of the reinforcements provided a sense of security against the looming crisis. The Dionian army soon reached the city outskirts. Eumekas was shocked by the speed of the Dionian mobilization, as Tarentine citizen soldiers were still trickling into the square. Diomelas remarked, "Dionian soldiers are always ready in camp, unlike our men who must be summoned from every district." Eumekas rode out to apologize to me, inviting me into the city to rest and drink, noting the scorching midday heat. I politely declined. I would not abandon my men to seek personal comfort. Soon, Triphias arrived with 1,000 Heraclean soldiers to join the Dionian ranks. Shortly after, Tadepras arrived with 2,000 Metapontum soldiers. An hour later, the Tarentine gates opened to a chaotic, wailing crowd. Olivorus mocked the scene, deriding the Tarentines for their tearful, disorganized farewells. Empty, Martones worried about the Tarentine army's late assembly and the presence of soldiers who looked barely of age, doubting their combat effectiveness. Olivorus sneered, "Expect nothing from them. They'll only be good for looting after we crush the enemy." Geogris warned, "Do not underestimate the Messapians. They are fierce and resilient. We must unite with the Tarentines to win." Geogris, a captain from the 3rd Legion, had been transferred to the 1st. While the new regional recruitment system, 1st/2nd Legions from Thurii/Amandalera, 3rd from Gramintum/Nerulum, and 4th from Crimissa/Asprostum, improved efficiency, it risked regionalism, which I planned to mitigate through officer rotation. Alexis added, "Geogris is right. This is an allied operation. If we alienate the Tarentines and they fail to support us at a critical moment, we'll be stranded far from Thurii." The other captains agreed with Alexis. Amintas clapped Olivorus on the shoulder, laughing, "I dislike these effeminate Tarentines too, but we must endure it for victory. I want to see if they thank us after we beat the Messapians." Both men laughed. Legate Capus signaled them to return to their cohorts as the Tarentine army finally emerged. The Tarentine procession stalled as women were shocked by the sight of Dionian soldiers lounging on the ground, many shirtless and speaking crudely. Tarentine soldiers grumbled at the sight of the resting Dionians. Diomelas expressed his disdain, demanding, "Where is Davos? Tell him to assemble his army." Eumekas pointed toward the largest, most prominent flag. Diomelas scoffed at the flashy flag and followed Eumekas to find me. I sat on the dirt in my linen undertunic, chatting casually with my men. Marcius, the guard captain, whispered to me, and I turned slowly to face the arriving Tarentine Archons. "Lord Davos, when do we depart?" Eumekas asked, cutting off Diomelas. I glanced at the sullen Diomelas and replied coolly, "It is time. The soldiers have been baking in the sun for over an hour." Realizing this was a veiled critique of the Tarentine army's sluggishness, Diomelas coughed awkwardly. "Sound the horns." I ordered decisively. At the signal, the soldiers sprang into action, donning armor and forming up as officers shouted orders and standard-bearers signaled positions. The chaotic noise soon settled into a disciplined silence. Diomelas was stunned to see the Dionian soldiers standing in perfectly organized columns. As a veteran general, he recognized the mark of rigorous discipline. In contrast, the Tarentine troops remained a disorganized mess of civilians and soldiers hugging and weeping. Embarrassed, Diomelas rode back to his lines as Triphias and Tadepras arrived. "Fully armored," I stated. "We must coordinate our marching order." I proposed Dionia in the lead, Heraclea and Metapontum in the center, and Tarentum at the rear. Eumekas understood. Dionia would act as the shield, buying time for the others if attacked. The others readily agreed, happy to be protected in the center. "The terrain to Manduria is flat," I continued. "I suggest 5 columns with wide spacing for rapid movement and protection of the supply train." Eumakas hesitated, knowing such a formation required high-level training. I must consult Diomedes, Eumakas said cautiously. Also, our scouts should be a joint force, I added. I brought my own cavalry and Izam's mountain reconnaissance battalion to familiarize them with the terrain. Desperate to bolster his depleted cavalry, Eumakas welcomed the proposal. When Eumakas relayed the plan, Diomedes retorted, "What Dionia can do, Tarentum can do as well." The coalition forces set out. The Messapian-Pusetian coalition had already retreated from Manduria, allowing the Greeks to enter the city by dusk without a fight. Morale soared, though the commanders struggled to house 30,000 troops in the small city. At dawn, Sorikos led the joint cavalry to the enemy camp, only to find it abandoned. Sorikos sent word and split his forces to search toward Ugintum and Brundisium. Upon receiving news of the enemy's retreat, I mobilized the army, soon learning the enemy was spotted to the east. The commanders assumed the coalition was retreating to Brundisium. "We cannot let them reach Brundisium. A siege would be disastrous," Diomedes urged. "We must catch them and force a decisive battle." Empty, the other commanders agreed, recalling the horrors of the previous siege. I concurred, though I felt a lingering sense of unease. Leaving the supplies behind, the 30,000-strong force marched north, reinforced by 3,000 Mandurian troops. 10 miles later, scouts reported the coalition had entered the northern mountains. I was puzzled. Eumakas looked shocked. "They are heading for the Amlern Hills," Diomedes exclaimed. I learned that the hills provided a path to eastern Tarentum. The Messapians hadn't used this route in decades, but the Tarentine defenses there had been abandoned due to the recent war. So the defensive camps are empty? I realized. Diomedes confirmed the camps were unmanned, warning that the enemy would burn their crops and slaughter their people. "We must stop them." Diomedes and Eumakas were panicked, but I remained calm, deep in thought. "Why do you hesitate?" Diomedes shouted. "Why chase them?" I countered. "Remember the plan. If they retreat, we take Brundisium to force their hand." Eumakas argued that the threat to Tarentum was now too great to ignore. "Tarentum won't fall easily, but Brundisium is vulnerable," I insisted. "Chasing infantry is futile. Let us take Brundisium or push to Egnatia. They will be forced to turn back and fight us on our terms." Eumakas hesitated, but Diomedes stubbornly refused, insisting that Tarentum's land was being destroyed and that he would rather delay the capture of Brundisium than leave their territory to the enemy. I snapped back, blaming the Tarentines for failing to properly map the terrain or warn me about the Amlern Hills, which they had previously described as treacherous and prone to ambushes. A sudden realization struck me. The Messapian cavalry, usually aggressive, had been conspicuously absent. I questioned if they were dead or if their absence was a deliberate lure. I warned the group that the Messapians were baiting them into an ambush at the Amlern Hills. I insisted they must avoid the hills to save the army and Tarentum. Eumakas was moved by the logic, while Diomedes fell silent. Tryphius loudly declared his support for my plan to attack Brundisium. Tadepras agreed, effectively overriding Diomedes, who reluctantly mounted his horse. I sternly addressed Diomedes, asserting that Dionia was there to help, not to be humiliated. I warned that if the Tarentines continued to defy my command as supreme commander, the coalition would be dissolved. The silence that followed was heavy. Even Tryphius and Tadepras were shocked by the young Archon's unexpected severity. Eumakas attempted to intervene, citing Diomedes' concern for his people. I cut him off, emphasizing that Dionia's success was built on strict discipline and that a 30,000-man army without unified command was doomed to fail. Under the collective gaze of the army and my pressure, a flushed Diomedes finally muttered, "Understood." At the Amlern Hills, King Tremoni of the Pucetii and the Messapian leaders waited, only to be disappointed by reports from their scouts. Tremoni was horrified to learn the Greeks were bypassing the hills for Brundisium, a city he viewed as his own personal source of wealth and territory. Pachimerus, the Archon of Rudii, calmed him, suggesting that the Tarentines would be forced to turn back once they saw their villages burning and their people slaughtered. Reassured, Tremoni ordered the execution of captured Greeks, demanding their bodies be displayed on the road to provoke a reaction. A scout reported the smoke from the hills and the sight of Tarentine corpses, including women and children, along the path. I coldly interrupted the scout, ordering him to return and ensure a Dionian scout was sent next time to report on enemy movements. The Tarentine scout rode off in a rage. I reminded a silent Yumikas that the Messapians were baiting them and that they must not enter the hills. Yumikas remained silent, brow furrowed. I ordered my herald, Tormid, to have the vanguard increase their pace to put distance between them and the danger. Xantiparis and his mercenaries had been integrated into the 1st and 2nd legions as reserve citizens. Despite his high rank as an acting centurion, his veteran peers felt he deserved even more. Tormid, known as the First Herald, was highly trusted for his ability to manage complex relations and ensure orders were executed. Empty, with assists occupied elsewhere, I appointed Tormid as my acting herald, intending to build a staff to help manage the increasingly complex military operations. The Tarentine scout ignored me and reported the gruesome scene to Diomedes instead, exaggerating the details. The Tarentine soldiers erupted in fury, accusing the foreigners of indifference toward their suffering. They demanded revenge for their kin and insisted on fighting the Messapians. The cry to march on the Amlern Hills spread through the ranks. The collective hysteria threatened to spiral out of control. Diomedes, fearing political ruin if he ignored the public outcry, realized he had to act or face exile for the war's failures. Ignoring his fear of me, Diomedes ordered his army to turn left and march toward the Amlern Hills. The soldiers cheered and began the maneuver. Tadepris, noticing the Tarentines breaking formation, immediately sent word to me. I exploded in rage upon hearing the news. My worst fear had materialized. Regaining my composure, I ordered Yumikas to intercept Diomedes and force him to return. Yumikas refused, claiming Diomedes was too stubborn to listen. I, furious, shouted for Tormid. I ordered Tormid to tell Diomedes that if he did not return immediately, I would pull the Dionian forces out of the campaign. Tormid nodded and rode off. When Yumikas questioned if I was serious, I silenced him with a roar. I seethed, realizing I could no longer tolerate the incompetence and insubordination of the Tarentine leadership, questioning if the entire coalition was worth the effort. The Tarentine adjutant watched the Daunian herald depart, worriedly telling Diomedes, "If the Daonians truly leave, our forces cannot withstand the massive Messapian-Pusician coalition alone. Rest assured, they will follow," Diomedes replied, masking his inner anxiety with feigned confidence. Daionia prides itself on keeping promises and seeks leadership over southern Italy. They wouldn't dare abandon an ally before battle and risk their reputation. He then ordered, "Slow the march." Tormid relayed Diomedes' refusal to me, and I had regained my composure. "Understood," I replied calmly. Tadepris asked, "Lord Davos, what now?" I scanned my officers, Yumikas' concern, Tadepris' unease, and Tryphias' indifference, before declaring, "Turn the army around. We reinforce that fool." Yumikas looked relieved, but Tryphias asked urgently, "What if there's an ambush in the Amlern Hills?" "Then we must go, not for Diomedes, but for the thousands of Tarentine citizens," I reasoned. Beyond the optics, I knew that if Tarentum fell, the indigenous tribes would threaten Heraclea and Metapontum, forcing Daionia to intervene anyway. Better to secure the regional balance now. The Amlern Hills were a dense cluster of rounded, mushroom-like mounds, creating a beautiful but treacherous landscape. For an army, the steep, undulating terrain was a nightmare. The hills forced a winding, inefficient path, and decades of neglect had swallowed the old trails and tall grass. Guided by scouts and distant smoke, the Tarentines navigated the hills without encountering the enemy. Those soldiers grumbled at the difficult terrain. When scouts reported the Daunian army entering the hills, Diomedes smirked. "Naive youth, you're no match for me." He looked ahead. The smoke was close, just a few hills away. Seeing the mangled corpses of Tarentine civilians, the soldiers' fatigue turned into rage. Hearing distant screams, they accelerated, causing their formation to stretch and thin in the narrow passes. Suddenly, Messapian war horns blared. Diomedes turned pale as the trap snapped shut. Sorikos shouted to his men, "Catch them! Don't let them escape!" The Daunian cavalry gave chase, but the rugged terrain caused several riders to fall, widening the gap between them and the fleeing Messapians. The Messapians maneuvered their horses with supernatural skill through the narrow paths, leaving Sorikos' men behind in frustration. Lades rode up to Sorikos. Sorikos saluted. Though Lades was only a captain, his status as commander of the independent Daunian cavalry was equivalent to a legion legate. Lades looked grave. More enemy cavalry will come. We must block them and prevent them from tracking our main force. Sorikos acknowledged the heavy task, noting that the hilly terrain was the only thing neutralizing the enemy's numerical advantage. Lades added, Davos is sending 200 peltasts to assist us. Empty, Sorikos relaxed. He knew the 7th Battalion's peltasts were lethal with javelins in confined spaces. Pachimerus, Archon of Ridii, led the Messapian coalition down from the hills to crush the Tarentines. The Pusicians and Egnatians held back, awaiting news of the Daonians. Tremoni hoped to ambush the Daonians as they rushed to aid Tarentum. However, the returning scouts brought disappointing news. What? They vanished. Tremoni raged at his scout, demanding to know their location. Tamagaras, the Egnatian Archon, intervened. They will come to rescue Tarentum. We must find their path to intercept them. Send all cavalry. Tremoni barked. He realized he had severely underestimated Davos, whose previous march toward Brundisium had been a feint. What is that young commander's name? Tremoni asked. Davos, Timagaras replied. Tremoni repeated the name, eyes burning with excitement. I, meanwhile, pushed my army forward, guided by my mountain scout team. The terrain was more expansive than expected, forcing the army into a wider, more exhausting detour than I had planned. The soldiers of Heraclea and Metapontum suffered, while the Daonians remained stoic. Eumakas was frantic. The sounds of battle confirmed the ambush. He regretted not trusting my earlier warnings. He pinned all his hopes on me, not daring to rush me. I was equally anxious, my soldiers exhausted, yet I pushed on, guided by the intensifying sounds of slaughter. Lord Commander, Izum has returned. Tormod shouted. I hurried to meet him. Lord Commander, no more detours, Izum panted. The battlefield is 2 hills away, but the enemy is also moving to intercept us. I calmed down. It was expected that the enemy would detect us, but they were rushing blindly. A head-on clash was fine, I just needed to reach them. Izum sketched a map in the dirt. I studied the terrain and ordered, accelerate. Deploy upon clearing this hill. 1st Legion on the left, 2nd on the right, the rest in reserve. Yes, Tormod replied excitedly. The Daonian reinforcements circled around to approach the exit of the Amlern Hills, placing them behind the Messapian Pusician coalition where the terrain leveled out. The Daonian army navigated the small paths between the hills, which were easily traversable at only 30 meters high. Hearing the sounds of battle, Daonian soldiers felt their fighting spirit surge. Pusician King Tremoni watched the Greek soldiers emerge from the mountain pass and sighed in relief, finally having arrived. A Pusician general pointed out a group of Greeks in ornate helmets riding along the path, led by a man carrying a golden banner. Tremoni whispered the name Diffusi, stepping forward to get a better look at his opponent. The general asked if he should send archers to fire upon them. Tremoni refused, eager to engage the young Greek commander and his hoplites in a true test of strength on the hills. I rode my horse along the path, surveying the battlefield. I asked my legates where the easiest breakthrough point lay. Capys and Dracos both pointed to the same spot. It was the lowest point between the hills, 4 to 5 meters high, flat and wide. I nodded, warning them that the easiest path is often the most heavily defended. I decided to send Amyntas's cohort to spearhead the assault, needing the raw impact of Amyntas's men to break the blockade quickly. Capys agreed, and Dracos fell silent. I ordered them to launch the attack as soon as their legions were ready. The legates saluted and returned to their units. I ordered the Heraclea and Metapontum troops to deploy to the right of the 2nd Legion, ready to advance once the 2nd Legion engaged. Tormod relayed the orders to the messengers. Eumakas questioned why the weaker troops were on the right, fearing their left flank would be outmatched. I explained that I needed a breakthrough on the right, where the terrain was flatter and better suited for the weaker units. Even if the left was held, a right-wing breakthrough would secure victory. Yumika's warned that the enemy would see their formation and adapt. I smiled confidently. They have no time. Before Yumika's could ask why, I shouted at Matonis, who had approached. Matonis nervously requested that his cohort lead the assault at the breakthrough point. Empty, Matonis insisted his soldiers could break through faster than anyone. I scolded him, reminding him this wasn't a rugby game and ordering him back to his post under threat of military law. After Matonis left, I told Tormid to inform Amintas that Matonis had challenged his position, hoping to spur Amintas to even greater effort. Tormid understood and rode off. Yumika's watched, impressed by my absolute control over my officers. I led my guard toward the hills. Yumika's asked if they weren't joining the fight. I laughed, noting that someone had to command. Yumika's, a veteran, was baffled that an Archon would stay behind, though the soldiers clearly trusted my leadership. Yumika's followed, still confused. Izum approached, asking for his cohort's orders. I assigned them as the reserve force, telling them to rest in the pass. Izum was disappointed. I reassured him that their mountain expertise would be needed soon. Izum smiled. Oliverus teased the dejected Matonis, reminding him that I was strictly professional during battle. Matonis ignored him and gathered his centurions. He demanded total commitment, insisting the third cohort be the first to break the enemy line, threatening severe consequences for poor performance. The centurions responded with enthusiasm. A squad leader ordered his men to remove their helmets. The soldiers complied, though the recruits were confused, fearing they would be vulnerable without their Corinthian helmets. Veterans of the Persian campaign advised recruits, climbing while looking up makes heavy helmets slide back, obstructing vision and causing falls. But without helmets, we're vulnerable, the recruits worried. Use your shields, the veteran replied, tilting his shield overhead at a steep angle. With this and the slope, you're protected. He sighed. If only we could wear our new helmets. They'd be perfect for this. Look at their right flank. Perlo pointed. Behind the Greek phalanx blocks, more troops were shifting right. They're outnumbering us there. If we stretch our line to match, we'll be too thin to defend. If we don't, they'll outflank us. Tremoni frowned, watching the enemy's disorganized blocks. He believed he had time to adjust before they linked into a full phalanx. Tremoni's 15,000 troops, including 3,000 Messapians, held the high ground. I commanded 14,000 Daunian legionaries, 1,000 mountain scouts, and 3,000 allies from Heraclea and Metapontum, a 3,000-man advantage. To keep my high ground advantage, Tremoni ordered, Perlo, take 1,500 men to reinforce the left. As the Pusetians scrambled to shift, the Greek war horns suddenly blared. Tremoni was stunned. The Greeks were attacking before forming a cohesive phalanx. As the Daunian blocks advanced, his own troops fell into chaos due to the mid-maneuver redeployment. Perlo, stop moving, Tremoni shouted. But the left flank. Tell Timagoras to bring the idle cavalry to support the left, Tremoni commanded. Tryphias was equally caught off guard, his troops still mid-march toward the right flank. What do we do? His men asked. Just get to our positions, Tryphias replied, feigning calm. The Daunian advance had widened the narrow mountain pass, easing their movement. I praised the 1st and 2nd legions for their swift, synchronized advance. Tormid arrived, breathless. The Heraclea and Metapontum troops haven't reached their positions yet. Don't worry, I said calmly. Their late arrival is better. Tormid realized the strategy. The weaker allied troops would be a liability if they attacked early uphill. By arriving late, they would confuse the enemy and act as a surprise reserve force against Tryphias's 3,000 men. Yumika's watched anxiously as the 40,000-strong battle began. Nearby, the Tarentum army was trapped in a narrow pass, ambushed by Messapians and lacking all command structure. Diomedes shouted for his men to fight for survival, but his voice was lost in the chaos of the slaughter. The Messapians squeezed them into the pass, leaving them no room to even swing their spears. As Diomedes neared despair, a sudden stir rippled through both armies. Horns! Our reinforcements are coming, the soldiers cheered. Hearing the faint, distinct horns, Diomedes felt a surge of hope. Hold, citizens! The Daonians are coming. Morale spiked among the trapped, while the Messapians intensified their assault. Perlo ordered his archers to fire. The height advantage granted them superior range and lethality, suppressing the Greek archers. Suddenly, stones whistled from below, slamming into the Pusetian archers. Slingers, Tremoni realized with a jolt. I regretted having only 400 slingers under Epitenes and Zippite, enough only to disrupt the enemy's rhythm rather than silence them. The Greeks advanced slowly under a rain of arrows, their shields clattering with the impact. As they climbed, javelins began to find gaps, wounding several soldiers. The wounded curled up behind their shields, waiting for the medical teams. Amyntas led the charge against the Egnatian heavy infantry at the lowest point of the slope. Ignoring military protocol, Amyntas sprinted to the front, inspiring his exhausted men to roar and follow him. 20 meters from the enemy, the unit halted. Defend, Timagoras shouted, expecting a charge. The Messapians leveled their spears, ready to punish the uphill attackers. Instead of a charge, 1,000 javelins whistled into the Messapian ranks, causing screams of agony. Shields up, a panicked Timagoras screamed. Amyntas drew a second javelin and roared, "Follow me," leading the charge with shield and spear. The soldiers surged forward. Timagoras watched in horror as the Greeks maintained a tight, iron wall formation while charging uphill. "Defend! Defend!" he shrieked. The javelin volley had shattered the Messapian formation. Amyntas's men slammed into them, the force of the impact pushing the disorganized defenders back. Tripping over their own fallen, the Messapians collapsed in rows. Amyntas's unit seized the slope, their spears driving the retreating enemy back. Zippite, captain of the 7th Battalion of the 2nd Legion, always prayed before battle. He led his men in singing the hymn to Hades, the patron of Dionia. He then ordered, "Slingers, keep suppressing the enemy. Archers, follow the hoplites and fire once in range. Peltasts with me." Satyrus, a peltast captain, urged him to stay back and command, offering to lead the charge himself. Zippite refused, determined to prove the peltast's worth. Recent rumors suggested peltasts were obsolete, better replaced by light infantry, a notion Zippite and his peers vehemently rejected. Epitenes and Zippite had long argued to me that peltasts were indispensable. This battle was their chance to prove it. Nearly 500 peltasts, led by Epitenes and Zippite, moved in small groups through the gaps of the hoplites' fish-scale formation. Laocoontici, currently serving under a delayed punishment for fighting a comrade, was in the front line. Climbing the dry, soft-soiled hill in full gear was grueling, yet Laocoontici and his comrades pressed upward. The Messapians rained javelins down from above. The force of the impacts knocked Laocoontici back, forcing him to anchor his spear in the dirt to steady himself. Seeing comrades slip, he noted that Dionia's unique, staggered formation prevented a total collapse, allowing the advance to continue. Laocoontici admired my innovative formation, finding it superior to the Spartan tactics he grew up with. He often fantasized about discussing it with me, but as a mere freeman, he could only watch from afar. Another volley of Puseti javelin struck. Laocoontici braced himself, angling his shield to deflect the projectiles and minimize the impact. When his comrade Habitelosi stumbled, Laocoontici instinctively grabbed him. Habitelosi hesitated, then thanked him. "Thank you, Prosus." Laocoontici nodded. The battlefield was forging a bond between them despite their past friction. He looked up to see the peltasts surging ahead. Unlike the auxiliary role peltasts played in the Peloponnesian War, Dionia treated them as a vital, frontline force. Armed with leather shields and glaives, the peltasts moved with agility, dodging javelins as they closed in. Their glaives served a dual purpose: weapons for combat and tools to anchor into the slope, aiding their rapid ascent. Zippite reached the enemy, facing a wall of spears. He crouched low, using his leather armor and shield to deflect the overhead thrusts. The Puseti struggled to strike the low-profile targets on the steep incline, forced to move forward to maintain their footing. Zippite seized the moment, lunging forward to hook a Puseti warrior's leg with his glaive. No content. The warrior screamed as he lost his balance and tumbled down the slope. Zippite rolled to safety, a maneuver repeated across the line, forcing the Puseti back and silencing their javelin fire. "Well done, 7th Battalion," soldiers cheered behind Laocoontici. Faster. Keep climbing, urged Parmenius, the squad leader. The flag-bearers signaled the advance. Inspired by the peltasts, Laeokikadisi and his unit surged up the final 30 meters, the peltasts shifting to the flanks as they engaged the enemy. Hades, the soldiers roared, shields raised as they slammed into the enemy line. Tryphia's and Tadepras' coalition forces arrived at the right flank, accelerating their pace to join the fray. Lacking immediate opposition, they merged their light infantry into the phalanx to thicken their ranks, rushing up the hill. They aimed to strike the enemy flank and decide the battle. But as they crested the hill, they were met by a massive force. Messapian cavalry. Tryphia's was shocked, but reasoned that the uneven terrain would negate their mobility. As the Heracleomedapontum coalition advanced, the cavalry began throwing javelins. Panic erupted. Cavalry. Messapian cavalry behind us. Thunderous hoofbeats echoed as a large force of Messapian cavalry circled through the mountain pass, striking the rear of the climbing Greeks. The coalition fell into chaos under the surprise attack. 1,300 Messapian and Pucidii cavalry had converged. The riders whispered final farewells to their mounts, their expressions hardening into resolve. Lycaon, the Pucidii cavalry shouted. Lycaon, the Messapians echoed. Invoking the legendary ancestor who defied Zeus, they sought to bolster their spirits for the coming clash. Cavalrymen on the ridge gripped their horses' necks and spurred them forward. Hundreds of horses charged down the slope in loose formation, gaining speed despite riders falling in the chaos. Raise shields. Tryphias stammered, his mind blank at the sight. To the Heracleomedapontum coalition, the charge looked like a landslide of boulders. As they panicked, the cavalry slammed into the phalanx. Horses collapsed, soldiers were sent flying, and the Greek formation disintegrated instantly. I received Tormid's report. A massive enemy cavalry force had appeared on the right flank. Uneasy, I acted immediately. Izum, take your battalion to reinforce Tryphias and Tadepras. Once the cavalry is repelled, strike the enemy's flank. Yes. Izum saluted, then sprinted to the pass, shouting, Brothers, follow me to battle. The scout battalion, armed with small leather shields and short swords, nimbly raced toward the right flank. Eumekas, stunned by the Daonians' fervor, privately resolved to avoid conflict with such battle-hungry warriors. Lord Diffusi, Messapian cavalry cannot defeat Greek hoplites, especially in these mountains. You needn't send reinforcements, Eumekas advised. If we know that, the Messapians, masters of cavalry, must know it too. Yet they sent them anyway. There is a trap, I replied calmly. Eumekas felt a growing sense of dread. Tormid reported. Amyntas was pushing back the Messapian heavy infantry in the valley. The 1st and 2nd legions held the advantage against the Pucetians, and the 2 light infantry battalions were flanking the enemy as ordered. Realizing I held numerical superiority for the first time in Magna Graecia, I felt confident in crushing any potential threats early. Pucetian King Tremoni was stunned. His Messapian heavy infantry were retreating, and his elite Pucetian warriors were failing to break the enemy despite holding the high ground. The stalemate was unsustainable. Tremoni knew his troops were poorly equipped and outnumbered. His only solace was the cavalry's success on the far left. He hoped the cavalry would finish the rout and help turn the tide of the battle. Seeing his scout running up the hill, Tremoni felt a surge of anxiety. My king, over 1,000 enemies have reinforced the left flank. Our cavalry is in a desperate struggle. The Messapian Pucetian cavalry had initially crushed the coalition, but the narrow mountain path stalled their momentum. When Izum's battalion surrounded them, the trap snapped shut. Without saddles, the riders couldn't fight effectively in the cramped space. The scout battalion used their shields to protect themselves while using short swords to hamstring the horses. The fleeing Greek soldiers, emboldened by the reinforcements, turned to fight. The cavalry was doomed. What? How could the Greeks have reserves? Tremoni stared in disbelief. In this era, city-states rarely held reserves. His gamble had failed, the military genius shaking southern Italy. Tremoni whispered, his spirit sinking. My king, what do we do? Perlo asked, noticing Tremoni's trance. Retreat was impossible. The armies were locked in combat. Tremoni regretted his arrogance. wishing he had left the Daonians to the Messapians. Wait, he finally commanded. Perlo was stunned. Relying on the Messapians to finish off the Tarentines was unlike his king. Perlo worried. What if they arrived too late? The Pusetian messenger reached the Tarentine ambush site, but the Messapian leaders were too occupied with the hard shell of the Tarentine hoplites to respond. The Messapians had split the Tarentine column into fragments, but as the battle dragged on, the shrinking pockets of resistance became harder to crack. Only the hope of survival kept the Tarentines fighting. Meanwhile, Prosus fought with terrifying precision, his shield and spear work so lethal that even the fierce Pusetians recoiled from his advance. Seeing the line buckle, Matones cheered from the center. "Who is that warrior at the front?" "Prosus," shouted squad leader Parmenius and the surrounding soldiers. "Commander, Matones' 3rd Battalion has broken the enemy line. Amintas' 4th Battalion has broken through. Epitines and Ziphites light infantry have crushed the flank. Izum's scouts have joined the coalition and routed the other flank." As the reports flooded in, Eumakas cheered. "We've won." I smiled with relief. "Sound the final charge. Break them completely. Retreat." Tremoni murmured, his expression desolate but calm. He had survived defeat before. He would endure this one too. The Pusetii forces collapsed, fleeing in a chaotic rout. Tremoni cast one last longing look at the enemy's brilliant banner before retreating. "My king, should we inform the Messapians?" Perlo asked. Tremoni, dejected, sighed. "Tell them the Daonians were too fierce, and we failed to hold them. Let them decide whether to retreat or continue fighting." Though he couldn't understand the Messapian tongue, his soldiers shouted in weary excitement. "The Pusetii are defeated. The Daonians have won. We are saved." Despair turned to fervor as the soldiers rallied, chanting, "Hold the line. Daonian reinforcements are coming." As time dragged on, the Messapian assault weakened until they finally withdrew. Diomedes, exhausted after 2 hours of desperate defense, could not pursue. He lacked the strength to command his depleted Tarentine troops. He slumped to the ground, surrounded by the grim sight of the dead and wounded. Pusetii losses were under 600, as their familiarity with the rugged terrain allowed them to evade pursuit, rendering the Daonian cavalry ineffective in the hills. Tarentum suffered over 4,000 casualties, a third of their force. Daionia lost 600, mostly minor injuries, while Heraclea and Metapontum lost 800. Despite the coalition's retreat, the Greek allied army suffered heavier losses, though Daionia captured 400 quality warhorses. I approached Diomedes with humility, personally directing medical aid for the Tarentine wounded, leaving Diomedes deeply ashamed. The coalition retreated north into Tarentine territory. Too exhausted to pursue, the Greek allied army rested in nearby villages, sending word of the victory and escorting their wounded back to Tarentum. That same day, the Daonian Senate received a visitor. Mithrobates arrived seeking aid for the Siru tribe within Brutium. The Brutii tribal league in Cosentia was forcibly consolidating smaller tribes. Most submitted, but the Siru tribe refused. Mithrobates claimed they were Greeks, descendants of those who fled after the fall of Sybaris, and refused to live as barbarians. After initial failed diplomatic attempts, the Cosentian authorities returned months later. This time, they issued an ultimatum: submit to the League's governance or face total annihilation. Panicked, the Siru tribe sent Mithrobates to beg Tarina for help. Unable to intervene, Tarina directed Mithrobates to Daionia, following prior consultations with me. Cornelius, the rotating chairman, looked skeptically at the envoy, whose appearance lacked typical Greek features. Mithrobates explained, "I inherited my mother's Brutii features, which is why the Siru chose me, to avoid suspicion from the Brutii." Cornelius recalled me briefly mentioning the Brutii issue before the Tarentum campaign interrupted their planning. Polixene stood up. "What can Daionia do? Protest? If they ignore us, we must either go to war or lose our prestige as the strongest alliance. Our citizens are already exhausted from the Tarentum campaign. Should we send them to die for a tribe that doesn't even look Greek?" Polixene's words resonated with the war-weary senators from Thurii and Amyndalara, who feared further conflict. Most pro-war senators were either serving abroad or currently with me at the front. As High Priest of the Temple of Hades, Plyzenas held significant influence and the trust of mine, making his words carry great weight. Plexenas retorted with feigned shock, listing the Senate's accomplishments. Cunegurata and Cornelius manage prosperity. Burkos oversees agriculture. Wisaba and Heman handle Lacanian tribal conflicts. Sitalongbali mints currency. Ansitanos build schools. Hirpulisai organizes medical conferences. Protesilaeus refines laws. Tritodemos manages officials. Ananias trains the navy, and Scambrus. Plexenas bowed to each mentioned senator. Only Mercis answered, "No one." Yet the rest of the Senate remained silent, silently agreeing. Plexenas argued that such a critical decision must wait for me. Even Polixenes' faction, despite their resentment of my control, could not deny the success of my leadership. Cunegurata rose to support deferring the Siru tribe issue to me. Cornelius, Ansitanos, Burkos, Ananias, and Massasakis agreed, finalizing the decision. After the meeting, Plexenas and Hirpulisai discussed using the Temple of Hades Relief Fund, donated by citizens, to treat indigent foreigners. Maligi caught up to Plexenas, thanking him for preventing the rejection of the Siru tribe's plea. Plexenas, now more mature, modestly attributed the victory to my prestige rather than his own persuasion. Polixenes has been quite active lately, Maligi hinted. He won't achieve anything, Plexenas replied. Hirpulisai, indifferent to politics, asked why Polixenes was even in the Senate. Plexenas coughed awkwardly. I had originally recruited influential Thurii survivors into the Senate to stabilize the city. Maligi intervened to save Plexenas from embarrassment, inviting him to Felicius's banquet. Plexenas was thrilled. This invitation signaled his acceptance by the core group of veteran mercenaries, the most powerful political and military force in Dionia. The next day, I, Diomelas, Eumekas, Tryphias, and Tadepras disagreed on the next military move. Tryphias argued for retreating to the city to regroup after heavy casualties. Diomelas, fearing impeachment for the heavy losses, proposed a compromise: rest briefly, then attack Brundisium. He argued that a field battle would favor the phalanx, or if the enemy avoided battle, capturing the city would provide spoils and slaves to appease the public. Eumekas agreed, but Tadepras, citing heavy Metapontum losses, supported Tryphias. Empty. All eyes turned to me. I was conflicted. I was tired of unreliable allies and wanted to return to Thurii, but feared damaging Dionia's reputation for keeping promises. A guard interrupted. A Messapian envoy had arrived. The group was stunned. I ordered the envoy in. Meanwhile, the Messapian leaders, led by Pachimerus, believed they held the advantage despite the retreat, as Tarentine losses were likely heavier. Tremonai, king of the Pukitai, strongly opposed further aggression, warning that the Dionian army's unique, disciplined phalanx was superior to their own. The Messapian leaders were shocked by Tremoni's uncharacteristic caution. Timagoras backed Tremoni, citing the Dionians' superior formation at Egnatia. He warned that Dionian hoplites' javelins were lethal at close range. The leaders grew grave. Carminus of Eugentum questioned if they could withstand a power like Dionia, which could easily mobilize thousands more troops. Pachimerus sighed. Perhaps we should negotiate. The room was stunned. Tremoni remained calm, leading Pachimerus to realize the Pucidii had lost their will to fight. Pachimerus argued that Dionia was only fighting to honor its alliance with Tarentum. If they could get the powerful outsider to leave, they could handle Tarentum alone. Timogoras, the Egnatian magistrate, entered the Greek camp. He identified the youngest general as me, the man behind their current predicament. He addressed me cautiously in Greek. Dionian Archon Davos? I am, I replied. Timagoras offered a Messapian greeting. I am Timagoras, representing the coalition to discuss ending this meaningless war. I, pleased, deferred to Eumekas and Diomelas. Diomelas, furious, rejected the offer, demanding they continue the attack on Brundisium. Timagoras mocked him, noting that without Dionian help, Diomelas would be dead. He challenged the Tarentines' courage, then turned to me. He praised my bravery and Tremoni's respect, asking if fighting a war with no benefit to Dionia was truly worth the cost. I, recognizing the attempt to sow discord, emphasized that Dionia's duty was to honor its alliance and maintain regional peace. My words hinted at my broader ambitions, impressing Tryphias and Tadepras. Timogoras countered that Tarentum was the aggressor, seizing Manduria and Brundisum and enslaving their people. He asked if Dionia's peacekeeping included supporting such aggression. I secretly admired the argument's precision. I feigned embarrassment. This. Diomedes retorted that the Messapians were the ones who had been raiding Tarentum for years. Timagoras argued that the land originally belonged to the Messapians before Tarentine ancestors seized it. That was centuries ago. It belongs to us now, Diomedes shouted. And we want it back. You'll never succeed. Eumekas interrupted the bickering, noticing the Dionian leader's impatience. You didn't come here just to argue, did you? Eumekas asked. I came for peace, Timagoras replied solemnly. Empty. Eumekas insisted on hearing the terms. Timagoras proposed an immediate ceasefire, prisoner exchange, and a 2-year peace treaty. What do you mean by returning to the status quo? Eumekas asked. Returning all seized territories, Timagoras replied. Diomedes cursed, refusing to give up Manduria. Negotiations collapsed. Timagoras left, noting that the Dionians seemed more open to peace than the stubborn Tarentines. Eumekas realized this too, telling me that Tarentum would never abandon Manduria. I smiled. Negotiations are like trade. There is room to bargain. Eumekas worried that a 2-year treaty was too short for Tarentum to recover. Before I could respond, a guard entered. Archon, an urgent message from the Senate. The Bruttians are moving. I stood abruptly, demanding the letter. A messenger waited in my tent, and I left immediately, leaving the others confused. Tormid and Diomedes were unfamiliar with the Bruttians. Tryphias explained that the Bruttians were indigenous mountain dwellers bordering Dionia, known for raiding Thurii and Castron. Eumekas asked if they were powerful, hoping for a negative answer. Tryphias exaggerated their strength, claiming they had dozens of tribes and several large cities, potentially surpassing the Pusetians in power. Eumekas and Diomedes felt uneasy. Outside, my anxiety vanished, and I teased Tormid for his performance. Tormid smiled. As a top herald, he understood my inner conflict and had staged the interruption to provide a pretext for action. My approval eased his nerves. I asked for details, confident that even a unifying Brution force posed little threat to the Dionian League. Tormid reported that a Greek tribe in Brution territory, the Silu, had requested aid after refusing to submit to Cosentia. Maligi was waiting in the tent to explain further. I realized the Silu tribe was the perfect excuse to intervene in Brutium. After reading the letter from Cornelius and hearing Maligi's report, I smirked, asking if Maligi had come specifically to counter Polixenes. Maligi dismissed Polixenes as irrelevant, but warned that his recent agitation in the Senate was unsettling other senators. I considered using Polixenes as a controlled opposition, but noted the warning. Maligi then reported that Dionian soldiers in Tarentum were being harassed by locals over a brawl involving a theater owner. I frowned, sensitive to military discipline. Maligi explained that soldiers had beaten a Tarentine theater owner at the market. Furious, I summoned Tormid. Tormid entered. I ordered Capys and Dracos to have their military judges investigate the brawl and identify the culprits and the cause. I then asked Maligi about grain prices in Thurii. Maligi noted high prices due to the wars in Sicily and Italy, but predicted a drop after the upcoming harvest. I instructed Maligi to tell Mersis to use the national treasury to secretly stockpile grain for 4 legions. Maligi, ignoring the legal breach, was excited by my intent to support the Silu tribe. I warned Maligi to keep the secret and avoid personal profiteering. Maligi understood the warning. Maligi asked how Tarentum would be handled if war with the Bruttians began. I predicted the Tarentine Archons would soon seek peace with the Messapians. Maligi saw the decline of Tarentum as a golden opportunity for the port of Thurii. Tarentine citizens, disillusioned by the war's cost and Diomedes' recklessness, were the primary drivers for peace. Empty. The war-weary citizens no longer desired to challenge Dionia, only to end the bloodshed. The Senate held an emergency assembly of citizens, voting to seek peace with the Messapians. To sideline the warmonger Diomedes, the assembly re-elected Eumekas and Dixidimus, tasking the latter with negotiating peace. Diomedes was not put on trial, but his political future was bleak. As Dixidimus traveled to the camp, I wrote to the Senate, detailing my victory over the Messapian-Pusetian coalition and noting the shifting allegiances of Heraclea and Metapontum. I argued that Dionia must now act as the dominant power in southern Italy, providing stability and protection to all Greek city-states. I insisted that aiding the Silu tribe would demonstrate Dionia's commitment to its allies and potential partners. I warned that war with the Bruttians was inevitable, as Cosentia was forming a unified, expansionist tribal league. I concluded that it was better to tame the beast of Bruttium now, while it was still growing, rather than fight it later. I handed the letter to Maligi. After Maligi left, Tormid reported the details of the soldiers assaulting a local citizen. Realizing the soldiers had broken military law to defend my own honor, I felt moved. I murmured, "Oliverus," struggling with my decision. Tormid argued that the soldiers were provoked by the Tarentines' insults against me and Oliverus, insisting they were not at fault. I silenced him with a single look. It was for me, I sighed. I ordered Tormid to have Capys and Dracos assemble the troops at the village threshing floor, leaving half to guard the camp, and to summon the military judge. Tormid tried to protest, but I cut him off, ordering him to execute the command. I stood atop a haystack before thousands of Dionian soldiers, thanking them for their bravery against the Messapians and Pusetians on behalf of the Senate and the people. The soldiers puffed out their chests with pride. I then addressed the assault on the Tarentine theater manager. The soldiers listened intently, whispering guesses about the culprits. I declared that despite the provocation, Dionian military law was absolute. I called for the military judge. The military judge announced that while the penalty for assaulting an ally was 20 lashes, the provocation warranted a reduced sentence of 10 lashes for each offender. The soldiers were relieved by the light punishment. Oliverus was ordered to step forward. The troops stirred in shock to see a captain among the offenders. Laiv Kadisi was stunned. Even the disciplined Spartan army lacked such strict accountability for officers. He recalled how Spartan soldiers often acted with impunity in allied lands like Corinth and Megara. Oliverus stepped forward, ready to accept his punishment. I looked at the offenders and declared, "There is one more person to be punished, myself." The entire army erupted in an uproar. The senior generals were so shocked they momentarily lost control of the ranks before I restored order. I explained that as their commander, I had failed to earn the Tarentines' respect, leading to the insults that provoked my men. I insisted on sharing the 10-lash penalty to maintain my own integrity, ordering Dracos to oversee the execution without leniency. Silence fell over the threshing floor as the soldiers watched their commander with intense emotion. Oliverus, moved to tears, shouted, "Victory to our Davos." The cry spread, joined by cheers for Dionia and curses against Tarentum. I calmly signaled the military judge to begin. I stepped down and stood beside Oliverus. Dixidimus arrived at the Tarentine camp, dismissed Diomelas, and prepared to discuss peace with Eumekas. Empty. They agreed that any peace negotiation required Dionian support. Arriving at the Dionian camp, they heard thunderous cheering. Tormid arrived to escort them inside. Eumekas asked if they were training. Tormid replied with reverence that Davos was currently receiving lashes for the soldiers' misconduct. Eumekas was incredulous. Upon hearing the explanation, Eumekas and Dixidimus were stunned that a leader would punish himself for his men's minor transgression. Instead of gratitude, they felt deep fear. They realized that the extreme discipline of the Dionian army was the true source of their military dominance. Terrifying Davos. Dixidimus whispered. Eumekas realized I was ruthless enough to sacrifice my own health for my goals. He feared having such a formidable Archon for life as a neighbor, yet felt relieved that the Tarentine citizens finally agreed to peace, preventing further reckless military actions. He cursed Timaeus for the Tarentines' lack of foresight. When the two Archons visited, they found me receiving medical treatment in my tent. Despite my surprise, I immediately supported their peace initiative. The next morning, the Tarentine coalition marched east. Halfway to Brundisium, the Messapian-Pusetian coalition blocked their path, and both sides arrayed for battle. After an hour-long standoff without a charge, the Tarentines signaled their desire for peace. Pachimerus, observing the disciplined Daunian army, realized the weight of Tremoni's earlier warnings and understood the Greeks' intent. Abandoning his pride, Pachimerus dispatched Timagoras to initiate negotiations. By dusk, a peace treaty was signed. Hostilities ceased. Manduria was returned to the Messapi, prisoners and corpses were exchanged, and a 10-year non-aggression pact was established. Additionally, Tarentum signed a trade agreement with the Pucidii. Tarentum returned Manduria because their senate realized it was indefensible against the combined Messapian Pucetian forces. With their citizen population depleted by war, they could not afford to garrison the town. The Archons had offered Manduria to me as a gift, but I, refusing to be a pawn in Tarentum's strategy to use Daunia as a shield against the tribes, declined the offer. I, lacking the strength for a two-front war, wisely avoided the trap. Eumekas and Exidamas used Manduria as a bargaining chip in the trade agreement to sway Tremoni, ultimately forcing Pachimerus to accept the 10-year peace. Tremoni requested to meet me, but I declined, citing my injuries. Meanwhile, the Daunian Senate approved the resolution to support the Scylla tribe. Maligi nominated Polixenes as the envoy to Cosentia, praising his eloquence. Mercis and Felicius quickly seconded the nomination, pushing Polixenes forward. Polixenes, sensing a trap by my inner circle, feared he would never return from the dangerous mission to the Brutii. A coward at heart, he desperately refused, even debasing himself to avoid the assignment. After Maligi's mockery, Antorus, a newcomer to the Senate, volunteered for the mission. The Tarentine coalition returned home with their dead, including Arcadus' remains. Following Eumachus's warning, the Tarentine Senate kept the public away, allowing the Daunian army to withdraw safely. After Arcadus' funeral, I and my remaining troops sailed back to Thurii. Antorus departed for Cosentia that afternoon with 3 attendants. He chose the treacherous Crathis River route toward Bycinia to save time. Past the last Thurii outpost, the path narrowed. A steep cliff on one side and a sheer drop to the raging Crathis River on the other. The terrifying sight of the churning river and deep whirlpools left Antorus and his men trembling as they navigated the path. Rain had eroded parts of the trail, leaving sections barely wide enough for one person. After 4 grueling hours, the terrain leveled out, revealing the small town of Bycinia nestled in a valley. Brutii sentries intercepted them, eventually escorting them into Bycinia and the local council hall. The hall was a primitive thatched hut with a central fire pit, providing warmth against the mountain chill. 3 men in fur coats sat by the fire. The youngest, Kanaru, stood and aggressively demanded to know why a Greek had entered their territory. Antorus calmly identified himself as a Daunian envoy sent to negotiate with the Brutii chieftains. Kanaru demanded to know the nature of his business. Antorus insisted he could only speak to the great chieftains. Infuriated, Kanaru accused them of being spies and ordered them whipped and imprisoned. Antorus and his men were alarmed. A man named Bajalipi intervened, warning Kanaru not to harm Daunian envoys before hearing from Chieftain Niculu. Empty, Kanaru ranted against the Greeks, viewing them as sheep to be devoured by the Brutii wolves, despite the rising power of the Daunian alliance. An older man reminded Kanaru of his father's warnings, threatening that disobedience would cost him his status. Kanaru relented, storming out while glaring at Antorus. Bajalipi and his companion, Brim, introduced themselves to the envoy. Antorus smiled and bowed, introducing himself. "We will notify Cosentia of your arrival immediately. Stay in Bycinia for now. Once we receive word, we will provide an escort to Cosentia." The Bruttians slept simply, wrapped in animal hides on the wooden floors around fire pits. Exhausted from the day's journey, Antorus and his party fell into a deep, snoring sleep immediately after dinner. In the darkness, one man remained awake. Among the attendants was a trusted slave, a translator named Adipagizi, a freeman of Greek Bruttian descent with a deep, suppressed hatred for his former captors, and Antrapolis, a reserve citizen and brother to my intelligence officer, Aristolus, sent by the military department to gather intelligence on the Brution region. Antrapolis mentally cataloged the day's observations, travel time, road conditions, Bycinia's fortifications, troop numbers, and the personalities of the local leaders, planning to verify the details the next day. He then turned his attention to Antorus, his secondary mission being to monitor the new senator's performance during the diplomatic mission. Initially resistant to such surveillance, Anthrapolis had once argued to his brother that such tactics mirrored the hated secret police of the Syracusan tyrant Hieron. Aristolos had countered that while Hieron was a paranoid oppressor, I was a wise Archon for life who protected citizen freedom. Strengthening my leadership against internal threats was essential for the survival of the Dionian League. Convinced, Anthrapolis had since monitored several senators. He found most loyal to me, with only a few like Polyxenes offering mere verbal dissent. He was curious about Antorus, a noble who remained reclusive in Thurii, and hoped this mission would reveal his true capabilities. The following afternoon, a messenger from Kazinsa arrived, granting the party entry. Bajalipi sent 10 warriors to escort the envoys. Shortly after leaving the city, they were intercepted on the mountain path. Kanaru appeared on horseback, gloating. "Greeks, did you think you could leave without my hospitality?" Antorus and his party grew tense. When the escorting warriors tried to intervene, Kanaru dismissed them, promising he wouldn't make things difficult for them. His expression darkened. "Give them 5 lashes each. Let them know they don't pass through my city for free." Before they could react, the Bruttians pinned them to the ground. Each received 5 lashes, leaving them bloodied. Adipagese, enraged, began cursing in the Brution language. Kanaru laughed and ordered 3 more lashes for him. As Adipagese prepared to curse again, Antorus whispered, "Remember why we are here." Adipagese fell silent and lowered his head. Finding the Greeks' lack of further resistance boring and fearing his father's wrath, Kanaru mocked them as cowards and rode off toward the east. The 4 men helped each other limp forward. As they ascended, the terrain smoothed into vast, rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, livestock, and scattered huts, a stark contrast to the rugged mountains. More people appeared on the road, driving livestock and carrying goods toward the same destination. By evening, under the moonlight, Antorus saw the looming silhouette of Kazinsa. Having arrived after hours, they camped outside the walls until the escorts notified the city the next morning. They were soon welcomed by guards and invited into Kazinsa. After breakfast, they were led to the Grand Council Hall, which was far more imposing than the hut in Bycinia. A man sat in the center, flanked by 3 others on each side, with his seat noticeably elevated. Recalling reports of the Brution Tribal League, Antorus bowed respectfully. "Honorable great chieftains, I am Antorus, envoy of the Dionian Senate, bringing greetings." Before the translation, the central figure spoke in Greek. "Envoy of Dionia, welcome to Kazinsa, the center of the Brution Tribal League. I am Pienluin, the great chieftain." The man to his left stood and asked in Greek, "Brutium and Dionia have no history of contact. What is the purpose of your visit?" The hall went silent, all eyes fixed on Antorus. Caught off guard by the directness, Antorus asked, "May I ask who you are?" "Sidorums, great chieftain of Vergae and elder of the League." Sidorums, who had once fought against me during the Lacanian invasion, was wary of Dionia's rising power and had urged the other chieftains to be cautious. "Empty," Antorus nodded, scanning the room. The suspicious, scrutinizing gazes of the leaders made him realize the mission's success was unlikely. Antorus steeled himself and declared, "As the leader of the Southern Italian-Greek alliance, Dionia is committed to maintaining peace and protecting Greek lives and property. We have mediated the war between Croton and Locri and recently sent troops to defend Tarentum against the Messapian-Pusetian coalition." Antorus noticed the atmosphere in the hall turn grave. The Silu, a peaceful tribe of Greeks living in these mountains for decades, are now being threatened by your new tribal league. They have been ordered to abandon their homes and submit to your rule in Kazinsa. The Dionian Senate has sent me to demand you cease these threats and restore their peace. The assembly was not surprised. They had anticipated that Dionia's envoy had come specifically for the Silu. Panjaru, leader of Napisha, stood up furiously. "Arrogant Dionian. The Silu live on Brution land and are subject to Brution affairs. This has nothing to do with you Greeks. Get out. We do not welcome outside interference." Antorus retorted coldly. "This region is called Brutium only by custom. It is not a unified state. The Silu have lived here for a century and have the right to remain independent." Nikulu, leader of Bycinia, erupted in rage. What right do you have to dictate to us? I have decided to send my army to wipe out the Silu this afternoon. Bojamu of Pandosia mocked. If Dionia grants independence to Crimissa, Asprostum, and Nerulum, perhaps we might spare the Silu. Antorus stood silently, ignoring their insults. Sidorums then asked, "What happens if we refuse your demands?" The shouting in the hall subsided. Antorus replied firmly, "I am here to convey the Senate's demand. If rejected, the Senate will decide our next move. Dionia never abandons its allies. I have just led 15,000 troops to crush the 30,000-strong Messapian-Pusetian coalition, forcing them to sign a peace treaty. I will soon return to Thurii for my triumph." The room buzzed with tension. Niculu continued to shout, declaring he did not fear war with Dionia. High Priest Philodoru stood to restore order. Pienluin spoke from the center. Brution warriors do not fear war. However, as neighbors, conflict would cause endless bloodshed. To avoid this, we will allow the Silu to leave Brutium in peace, provided they are not punished. Niculu protested. Pienluin, we must not bow to Dionia. Antorus immediately countered. What about their land? Are you stealing the homes they have inhabited for generations? Pienluin glanced at Niculu, who fell silent despite his visible anger. Philodoru warned, "Allowing them to leave instead of enslaving them is our greatest act of mercy. Do not be greedy, Dionian." Antorus shook his head. "My orders are clear. The Silu's right to independent survival must be guaranteed." Pienluin's eyes flashed. He said calmly, "We will discuss this and decide later." Sidorums added, "We also need to investigate the current state of the Silu tribe before making a judgment." After the guards escorted Antorus out, the debate intensified. Pandru fumed. "Dionia is bullying us. They just don't want to see the Bruttians unite." Philodoru encouraged them. "We must unite more tightly to stand against the Greeks and Lacanians." Niculu gestured to behead the envoys. "Why not just kill them?" Sidorums intervened. "No. Even in war, envoys are protected. We must follow these universal customs to build our reputation as a powerful alliance. Killing them would only invite an unavoidable war." Niculu insisted. "My people do not fear them." Pienluin cautioned. "We don't fear them, but war would derail our goal of unifying Brutium." Bojamu suggested, "Let's imprison them until we destroy the Silu. Once the tribe is gone, they will have to accept the reality." Sidorums agreed. "That is a good idea. We can refine it further." The others agreed, though Niculu scoffed at the complexity. Pienluin warned, "We will implement Sidorum's plan, but we must prepare for war should Dionia refuse to accept it." Niculu declared, "Dionia is stronger, but they will never leave our mountains alive. Umla, our goddess, has protected us for centuries and will continue to do so." The assembly felt emboldened by his words. Philodoru added, "We must also seek allies to share the burden of resisting Dionia." Sidorums exclaimed, "The Lacanians! Dionia's capture of Gramentum threatens their territory. If they don't want to be next, they will ally with us." Pienluin realized the strategic necessity, despite the past enmity between the Bruttians and Lacanians. Niculu mocked Sidorums. "Since you are such good friends with the Lacanians, you should be the one to negotiate this alliance." Sidorums, great chieftain of Vergae, had once joined the Lacanian tribal alliance, causing widespread panic among the Brution tribes. Despite his later initiative to form the Brution League and Vergae's status as the second strongest power, lingering prejudice meant his influence in the council hall remained weaker than Niculu's. Ignoring Niculu's mockery, Sidorums solemnly told Pienluin, "Leave the alliance negotiations with Pixis and Potentia to me." By the end of the meeting, no one had suggested allowing the Silu tribe to remain independent. To do so would embolden other tribes to resist integration, hindering the unification of Brutium. Adipagesi returned to their quarters, looking dejected. "Well, still won't let us leave?" Antrapolis asked. Adipagesi shook his head angrily. "They keep repeating the same excuse, that tribal riots make it unsafe for us to go out. They're clearly holding us prisoner. Perhaps they're trying to isolate us while they finish off the Scylla tribe," Antrapolis said, looking anxiously at Antorus. Antorus, however, lay calmly on his couch, letting his slave apply ointment to his whip wounds. He understood from my letter that protesting the treatment of the Silu was merely a pretext for Dionian intervention. If the Bruttians destroyed the Silu, it would simply provide the casus belli I truly desired. Having served under the Archon for months, Antorus knew better than to underestimate me. He realized that regardless of the mission's outcome, Dionia would achieve its strategic goals. Antorus replied calmly, "There is no need for haste. We can wait." 3 days later, Pienluin informed Antorus of a disaster. The Scylla tribe had descended into civil war. Factions split between joining the Greek city-states and merging with Cosentia, leading to a massacre where the pro-Cosentia faction slaughtered their kin. Antorus was forced to meet the surviving leaders, who adamantly demanded to join Cosentia and rejected all Dionian aid. Antorus remained largely silent throughout, leading the Brution great chieftains to mistakenly believe the Dionians had helplessly accepted this outcome. Pienluin apologized, claiming they were focused on resettling the survivors. He urged Antorus to convey their sincere apologies and desire for friendship to the Senate, hoping to prevent any aggressive Dionian retaliation. Antorus replied evenly, "I will report the events and your words to the Senate exactly as they occurred. I cannot predict what decision the Senate will make." Cosentia did not hinder my departure. Instead, they provided lavish gifts and gave me a grand, formal send-off. Sidorums took center stage, providing 100 Vergae warriors as an escort and accompanying me personally. To avoid the hostile Bycinia route and the difficult mountain paths, I chose to travel north through Vergae to Laos, then return to Thurii via the La River fortress. After a day's journey, we reached Vergae, where Sidorums hosted a sumptuous banquet. The following day, the party exited the Brutii Mountains and arrived in Laos. Only when the Archon of Laos, Avanogus, and the city's elite came out to welcome them did I finally relax. I arrived at the port of Thurii with the troop transports. To avoid the chaotic crowds of citizens welcoming their returning kin, I followed Marcius's advice, sailing west along the Crathis River to the inner city docks before slipping quietly into my residence. Slave manager Labazo was supervising the cleaning of the courtyard cistern when he saw me enter and exclaimed, "Master, you've returned. How has the household been while I was away?" I asked with a smile. "Everything is well. My lady prays for you daily at the Temple of Hades, as do we all. May Hades be praised for your safe return." Labazo beamed. I handed him a gift. "I bought this for you in Tarentum, a Carthaginian leather cap to protect against wind, sand, and cold." Labazo took the gift, overcome with emotion, and knelt to offer his thanks. I quickly stopped him. "You are a freeman now and manage my slaves. Don't kneel so easily, or you'll lose your authority." I then hurried through the front hall toward the backyard. "Boss, the master is so kind to you," a new slave remarked enviously. Labazo tucked the cap away, telling the newcomer, "You don't know him yet. The master treats us well. If you work hard, he notices, and you may one day earn your freedom, just as I did." "Really, I am living proof," Labazo declared. I greeted Asuna, who teased me about my quick return. "The lady is the beautiful one, not me. And people don't change in just a few days," Asuna replied. I laughed and greeted Andrea, who was also present. Kelisuatia stood up with her child, smiling. "We were discussing when Andrea will give birth. If it's a girl, we'll betroth her to little Chloe." I looked at Andrea's pregnant belly and joked, "Agreed. As long as she doesn't take after Batel, she'll be a beauty. Little Chloe is getting a bargain." I then lifted my son, little Chloe, into the air. The baby laughed and kicked his legs in the air. "See? He agrees," I laughed. Kelisuatia playfully scolded me. "You sent Batel to Gramentum, leaving Andrea pregnant and alone. How can you joke about that? That was a Senate appointment, not my decision," I protested, rubbing my shoulder. Andrea blushed. "I have family here in Thurii, and Batel visits when he can. I am doing quite well." Batel had been appointed city magistrate of Gramentum, but due to Andrea's severe morning sickness and the instability of the newly occupied city, he had convinced her to remain in Thurii for her safety. Calixitoia suggested hosting a small banquet at noon to celebrate my return and pray for Andrea's safe delivery under Hera's protection. I readily agreed. I awoke to sunlight streaming through the window. As I rose, I caught sight of my wife Calixitoia's back. After the banquet and Andrea's departure, Asuna took little Chloe, and I had carried Calixichoya to our bedroom. Our long separation fueled our passion, leading to an hour of intimacy that left Calixichoya exhausted. Empty, I admired her postpartum figure, still supple and alluring. As I caressed her, my desire flared, but a sleepy Calixichoya begged for more rest. I suppressed my urges and tucked her in. In my study, I listened to Aristola's report on events during my absence, including my brother's trip to Cosentia. Aristola's noted my brother had been gone 6 days without word. I sensed his hidden anxiety. I reassured him that the Bruttians wouldn't dare harm an envoy, promising to threaten war if there was no news soon. Aristola's expressed his gratitude. I promised that any hero risking their life for Dionia would be rewarded, noting my brother would likely gain formal citizen status early. Aristola's bowed respectfully. I asked for further updates. Aristola's shifted his tone, mentioning Polixenes. I blinked in surprise. Aristola's reported that Polixenes had freed several slaves, who then applied to lease land through the agricultural department. I listened calmly. On the surface, this aligned with my own policies. Yet, I suspected a deeper scheme. Aristola's revealed that these freedmen were funneling most of their profits back to Polixenes. My eyes widened. How much are they giving him? Aristola's noted that 35 freedmen were leasing 180 mu of land, with a significant portion of the yield going to Polixenes. I demanded to know why no one had reported this. Aristola's explained that these were longtime household slaves loyal to Polixenes. By securing fertile land, they earned more than they did as slaves, even after paying taxes and their master's cut. They were also kept under close supervision by Polixenes' overseers. My eyes narrowed coldly. Does Burkos know? Aristola's was certain Burkos was unaware. I felt relieved, as I respected Burkos' cooperation. I realized, however, that Burkos might be tarnished by his association with Polixenes. I asked if others were doing the same. Aristola's admitted they lacked the manpower to investigate thoroughly. I ordered a detailed plan for more resources, demanding a strict investigation into all senators and public officials. I was furious at the early signs of corruption. I warned Aristola's to keep the investigation discreet. Understood, my lord. Mercis burst into the living room, looking indignant. I corrected his address, demanding he use my proper title. Mercis demanded to resign as treasurer, claiming the job was impossible. I teased him, then grew serious when I saw Mercis's distress. Mercis questioned the order to prepare 2 months of rations for 4 legions. I confirmed the order. Mercis lamented the massive cost, for million gene of grain, noting the treasury was already drained by infrastructure projects, public salaries, and the construction of new temples of Hades. Mercis, I know you've worked tirelessly to save costs for Dionia, I praised. But if you quit, I won't find a better treasurer. Can you bear to see our hard-won alliance collapse from poor financial management? Flattered, Mercis shed his frustration. The alliance is growing, making management difficult. I can prepare supplies for 3 legions for 1 month. If that's not enough, replace me. 1 month. I'm used. Previous conflicts were brief, but conquering the Bruttians would be a protracted war. I estimated 2 months, yet Dionia's current reserves couldn't even sustain 1. War is a test of national strength. I realized Dionia's foundation was still too shallow compared to established powers like Syracuse, which had been fighting Carthage for months. Davos, I have a solution for the grain supply, Mercis said mysteriously. Oh, what is it? The autumn harvest is coming. We can have citizens bring 20 to 30 days of their own rations. Empty, I hesitated. Greek citizens usually provided 5 days of rations. Demanding more felt like a forced donation, potentially dampening morale. Mercis countered. They won't lose out. They'll gain land after we defeat the Bruttians. Land grants are already established policy. I shook my head. We cannot use that to extract extra benefits from citizens. Mercis tried to persist. I interrupted. However, you've given me an idea. We can borrow grain from citizens in the Senate's name and repay it with interest once the treasury is full. That's a good plan. Mercis agreed. But the interest must be low. You set the rate, I said, relieved. Draft a proposal for the Senate. Mercis joked about his support, then asked, when will the thermal bathhouse open? I want to be the first to use it. Mersis had been obsessed with the bathhouse ever since I described the benefits of combining massage with thermal water in Persia. I readily agreed. After Mersis left, I studied the map of Brutium, searching for a strategic breakthrough to shorten the war, before taking a walk to clear my mind. In the courtyard, my adopted son Adoris waved while playing rugby with slaves. I smiled, noting how well the children had integrated. Cynthia was especially helpful with little Chloe, while the others were likely still at school. I walked the corridor and encountered Henipolis. As the son of the Laos Archon, Henipolis lived with me to foster loyalty, a practice now common among other allied leaders' children. "You're back," Henipolis shouted. "Did you defeat the barbarians?" "Tarentum signed a peace treaty," I replied, shifting the topic. "How are your studies with Ansitanos?" Henipolis had struggled to find his path, cycling through medicine, mathematics, and sports before settling under the scholar Ansitanos. "That old man treats me like a slave, making me copy texts and run errands," Henipolis complained. "I can find you a new teacher," I offered. Henipolis panicked. "No, he'll make my life miserable if he finds out." He admitted, "I've actually learned a lot." He even assigned me an essay on why Cyberus fell. "And what is your conclusion?" I asked. "It was the difference in leadership. Croton won because of Pythagoras, just as we win because of you." I smiled. "That's part of it. But the real reason was luxury. It eroded their bodies and spirits. Even after losing a battle, a strong state could have reorganized, but they lacked the will. Croton is the same today," I continued. "Their long dominance made them arrogant and complacent. If they had fought, we wouldn't be where we are. Hardship preserves a state. Ease destroys it." Henipolis was inspired. "I'll put that in my essay. Don't tell him it came from me." I laughed. Days later, Taurus returned, and the Senate, enraged by reports of Brutian atrocities, vowed punishment. Cypros, an envoy from Tyrrhena, arrived with survivors of the Silu people. I promised them that Dionia would seek justice against the Brutians. The survivors' testimonies stirred the public, and citizens clamored for revenge against the Brutians. War fever gripped Dionia, but the Senate delayed mobilization until after the harvest. Meanwhile, in Corinth, the city's central location on the isthmus made it a historical hub for Greek alliances and trade. Corinth, once a Mediterranean powerhouse, established the Isthmian Games over a century ago, elevating them to one of the 4 great Pan-Hellenic festivals. Held every 4 years to honor Poseidon, this year's games were delayed until September. Despite tensions, most Greek city-states sent athletes, including Sparta. Only Athens abstained, still harboring resentment over Corinth's post-Peloponnesian War demand to raise Attica and slaughter its people. The Pine Forest Stadium was packed with expectant spectators awaiting the preliminary races as athletes entered the arena to cheers. The start was delayed by a heated dispute at the entrance. A Corinthian official hurried over to the judges, demanding an explanation. "This man claims to be a runner," a judge replied, "but he is not a Greek." The official inspected the athlete. Despite the olive oil, his deep-set eyes, high nose, and distinct features clearly marked him as a non-Greek. "How did the temple priests approve his registration?" the official asked, stunned. "His city's officials likely registered him. The priests were unaware of his background," the judge answered. The official demanded, "Which city-state is this? Do they not know the rules of the Isthmian Games?" Adrianx pushed forward, shouting, "We are from Dionia. Lazuru is a Lacanian, but he is a Dionian citizen. The rules state any citizen of a Greek city-state may compete." The official scoffed, "No Greek city-state grants citizenship to barbarians. Leave now, or I will have you forcibly removed." Adrianx, a former mercenary with little knowledge of athletic protocols, felt foolish. He had sought advice from Crotonians, but they had clearly withheld information to see Dionia humiliated. Lazarus shouted, "Our Archon, I say all Alliance citizens share equal rights. In Dionia, Greeks, Lacanians, and Thracians all compete together." The official laughed mockingly and turned to the crowd. "Is this foreigner right?" The crowd erupted in jeers. Absurd. Only a barbarian leader would say such things. "Get out, barbarian. Go back to whatever filthy place granted you citizenship. Leave, barbarian. Do not defile our sacred grounds." The insults rained down, leaving Adrianx pale. Lazuru, a fierce competitor who had dreamed of testing his speed against the Greeks, was incensed. He had registered late and was not about to be turned away. With a roar, he bolted onto the track. "Stop him," the official screamed. Lazaru sprinted with the speed of a mountain wind, leaving the official and his guards far behind. The official's shouts alerted the other athletes, who joined the chase to intercept the rule breaker. Lazaru was exhilarated, not afraid. The crowd watched in amazement as Lazaru dodged his pursuers with feline agility. The race turned into a thrilling chase, and some spectators even began cheering for the lone hero. As a top running back in Dionian rugby, Lazaru maintained his pace through sheer skill until the official mobilized enough men to swarm and tackle him. The breathless official immediately struck Lazaru. Pinned down by the mob, Lazaru could only glare in defiance. Adrianx rushed over, grabbing the official's arm. "Release our citizen, or I will protest to the Corinthian assembly." "Protest?" the official sneered. "Arrest them both. They have desecrated the games. They will stay in custody until your bizarre league pays for this." The two were dragged away. Lazaru roared. "I, Lazaru, a citizen of Dionia, am the true champion of this race." Order was restored, but the crowd remained abuzz with the incident. He was incredibly fast. A pity he's a barbarian. What city-state would grant citizenship to a barbarian? He said Dionia. Is that even a Greek city-state? Spectators from the Western Mediterranean began to clarify the situation. Dionia is a league formed last year in Magna Graecia, centered in Thurii. They occupy Lacanian lands and grant citizenship to the locals. So they grant citizenship to many barbarians? Yes, Lacanians, Thracians, Egyptians. If they qualify, they become full citizens and receive an allotment of land. By Athena, am I dreaming? Barbarians becoming citizens and receiving land allotments? Is Dionia even a Greek city-state alliance? Yaonisi, you Peloponnesians ignore the West. In the Gulf of Taranto, Dionia is the only word on everyone's lips. Thousands of freemen flock there to become citizens, and every senate in Magna Graecia watches their every move. Freemen seeking land I understand, but why the ruling elites? Because Dionia is now the most powerful alliance in southern Italy. Are you joking? I thought Croton and Tarentum held that title. Croton has faded after 2 defeats by Dionia. Tarentum, meanwhile, has begged Dionia for military aid against local barbarians. Dionia now governs Thurii, Amendolara, Crimissa, and vast parts of Lucania, with Laos and Castron as dependents. They are allied with Tarentum and lead the South Italy alliance alongside Croton, Turina, Cilicium, and Colonia. Wait, you said Dionia was founded less than 2 years ago? That's impossible. Call it a miracle. Their Archon is a god-favored of Hades, young, yet undefeated against Lacanians, Crotonians, and Locrians alike. If they are that strong, Corinth should avoid offending them over a minor arena dispute. That is your concern, Yaonisi. What about Regium Zippacusi? Why haven't you joined this powerful alliance? We regions have no desire for hegemony. We only wish to live our own lives. Everyone thinks that, but the gods are fickle. You'd be better off seeking a strong ally than waiting for conflict to find you. This spectacle sparked widespread curiosity about the mysterious Dionian League, spreading its name across Greece. Many in the arena stands began inquiring about Dionia's origins. 2 young men from Thebes listened intently. Dionia is a fascinating alliance, don't you think, Epaminondas? Epaminondas mused. To dominate Magna Graecia so quickly requires more than just an Archon skill. Their political system must be unique. I agree. When my studies end next year, I'm going to Dionia. Come with me. Epaminondas shook his head. I'm sorry, Pelopidas. My teacher Lysis is preaching Pythagorean doctrines here in Corinth. I must stay to assist him. Pelopidas grabbed his arm. Thurii is just a 2-day sail across the Gulf. You're my best friend. Don't make me go alone. With Adrianx and Lazaru imprisoned by Corinth, the Dionian delegation panicked and sent word back to Thurii. The Senate convened. Polixenes and a few others argued that Lazaru's recklessness and Adrianx's poor management had made Dionia a laughingstock, demanding they be punished. I disagreed, blaming the conservative, xenophobic Corinthians for rejecting Dionia's multi-ethnic citizens. I proposed that Dionia organize its own games instead. My stance won the support of the majority, including Waizaba, Hemen, Batel, Maligi, and Epitenes. Unable to force Corinth to release the men, the Senate decided to send an envoy with an apology and a donation to the Temple of Poseidon to secure their safe return. Despite Mercus's objection, the motion passed. I, prioritizing the upcoming war against the Brutii, reluctantly accepted the compromise. During the autumn harvest, the citizens were busy with their crops. I remained active, surveying the river valleys toward Pandosia, the upper Crathis, and mountain roads toward Vergae with my aides, calculating logistics for potential military maneuvers. Upon returning, I consulted with Felicius, Carpusi, Dracos, and other military leaders to finalize attack plans. In late September, news arrived that Bruttians had intruded into Terina. In reality, the Brutii Tribal League was aggressively purging tribes that refused to join them, forcing refugees to flee. I seized the opportunity, ordering Aristolas to spread rumors that the Brutii were preparing a massive invasion of Dionia, reminding the public of their past atrocities. Fear and anger swept through Dionian cities, with citizens demanding war to eliminate the threat. By early October, with the harvest complete, the public mood made war inevitable. The Senate formally declared war on the Brutii, citing their refusal to heed warnings and their destruction of the allied Siru tribe.